She runs billion-dollar negotiations without flinching. She silences boardrooms with a single look. But the one problem Serena Blackwood cannot solve with money, influence, or sheer willpower is standing 30 feet away her 5-year-old daughter, pressed against a concrete wall in a hotel service corridor, crying so hard she can barely breathe. A dozen hotel employees surround the child. None of them can reach her. Then a janitor sits down on the floor, pulls a cleaning cloth from his pocket, and does something nobody expects. And Serena Blackwood, a woman who has never been stopped by anything, goes completely still. If this kind of story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow along to the end. You won't want to miss what comes next. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling us the city and country where you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories travel. The lobby of the Cresthaven Grand Hotel smelled like fresh-cut flowers and old money, which Serena Blackwood had long since stopped noticing. She had been coming to this hotel since her early 20s, back when she still needed to borrow her mother's blazer for business meetings. Back when she would sit in the lobby restroom before a pitch and tell herself in the mirror that she belonged in rooms like this. She was 30 now. She owned rooms like this. She co-owned 3 properties in the Cresthaven chain, in fact, though she rarely mentioned it, because that kind of information tended to change how people behaved around her, and she already had enough of that problem. The charity event was being set up on the ballroom's second level. Staff moved in organized patterns around white linen tables, adjusting centerpieces and running cable beneath temporary staging. Serena had helped design the fundraiser herself, a benefit for children's literacy programs in the tri-state area, something she cared about for reasons she didn't discuss publicly. The event was still 18 hours away, but she wanted to walk the room, confirm the setup, and spend a quiet Saturday doing something that wasn't about profit margins. Ellie walked beside her, one small hand wrapped around 2 of Serena's fingers. That was how Ellie had been walking lately, not swinging her arm freely the way she used to, not running ahead and forcing Serena to call after her, just holding on. 2 fingers, like she needed to verify every few seconds that her mother was still there. Pediatric therapist called it a normal response to disruption. That was the word she used, disruption. Serena had nodded, written the check for the sessions, and spent the drive home trying not to think about the fact that she and her ex-husband Marcus had been the disruption. Their marriage hadn't collapsed so much as corroded slowly, then all at once, in a way that left everyone exhausted. And Ellie caught in the middle of a household where 2 adults had stopped knowing how to be in the same room together. The divorce had finalized 8 months ago. Ellie had just turned 5. "Mama, are those flowers real?" Ellie asked, pointing at an enormous arrangement near the ballroom entrance. "Some of them." "Which ones?" "The white ones." Ellie studied the arrangement with the focused seriousness she brought to everything these days. "Pink ones look realer. They're very good fakes." "How do you know?" Serena glanced down at her daughter. "Because the real ones would have already dropped petals on the floor." Ellie considered this. Then she nodded, satisfied, the way she did when an answer made enough sense. She had Marcus's eyes, that particular shade of dark gray that looked almost green in certain light, and she had Serena's stubborn jaw, which meant that when Ellie decided something, she decided it completely. Serena's phone buzzed. Then again. And a third time in rapid succession, which was the pattern that meant it wasn't going to stop. She glanced at the screen. 3 messages from her chief financial officer, Daniel Park. The first one read, "Call me now." The second one read, "Seriously, now." The third contained a single number, the name of an investment group Serena recognized immediately, followed by 2 words, "Counterbid." Her stomach dropped. The acquisition had been 18 months in the making. Technology company called Arcean Systems, mid-sized, but with patents that would take Blackwood Industries 3 years to replicate independently. The deal was 48 hours from closing. A counterbid at this stage wasn't a business problem, it was a message. Someone was trying to force her hand. She looked down at Ellie. Ellie was looking back up at her, reading her face the way children read their parents' faces, with an accuracy that adults rarely appreciate. "Is something wrong?" "No, baby. I need to make a quick call." "How quick?" "Very quick." It was not very quick. It became clear within 90 seconds that Daniel needed her on a conference line with their legal team and 2 board members, which meant it would be at minimum 15 minutes, possibly longer. She pulled their nanny, a steady, unflappable woman named Rosa, from the event staging area where she had been helping with some minor logistics. "She's had her snack," Serena told Rosa. "She's in a good mood right now. Just stay close to her, please." I'll be back in 15 minutes. Of course, Rosa said. Serena found a quiet alcove off the hotel's main corridor, the kind of semi-private space hotels kept near their conference suites, with 2 chairs and a small table and a view of nothing particularly interesting. She sat down, connected to the call, and immediately became the version of herself that boardrooms knew, focused, precise, operating entirely on information and forward pressure, everything else filed away. She was good at filing things away. That had always been one of her skills. Call ran longer than 15 minutes. Rosa was exactly where she was supposed to be, standing near the ballroom entrance, speaking with one of the event staff when she turned to check on Ellie and found the spot beside her empty. She turned in both directions. She scanned the immediate area. She walked quickly to the nearby restrooms, checked both, came back out. Her pulse was already climbing, but her face stayed controlled, because Rosa had been working with high-profile families long enough to know that panic was the least useful response to any situation. She flagged the nearest hotel employee. By the time Serena ended the call and walked back down the corridor, there were 6 hotel staff members conducting a quiet but increasingly urgent search, and Rosa was holding her phone, deciding whether it was worse to call Serena and alarm her or wait another 2 minutes in the hope of finding Ellie herself. She called. Serena heard Rosa's voice say, "She's not beside me," and was already moving before the sentence finished. They found Ellie in a service corridor off the hotel's east wing, one of those utilitarian hallways that exist in the bones of luxury buildings, where the polish of the public spaces gives way to bare concrete and fluorescent lighting and carts full of cleaning supplies. Not far from the main corridor, maybe 60 feet, but it felt further, the way any wrong door feels further once you've opened it. Ellie was sitting on the floor, with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, crying in that specific way that children cry when they've been frightened past a certain point, not the loud, demanding cry of a child who wants something, but something quieter and more desperate, like the crying had been going on for a while, and she was starting to run out of air. 5 hotel employees were already there. One young woman was crouched in front of Ellie with her hands out, speaking softly. A man in a manager's jacket was on a radio. Another employee was trying to offer a wrapped candy from her pocket. Ellie pressed herself harder into the wall every time someone came closer, which only made them try harder, which only made it worse. Serena came around the corner and took in the scene in 1 second. She pushed past 2 of the staff members without speaking. She dropped to her knees on the concrete floor in her $300 trousers and said, "Ellie, baby, I'm right here." Ellie looked at her. Serena reached out. And something happened that had been happening for the past 8 months in various forms. Ellie flinched. Not a dramatic flinch, not one that anyone who didn't know her well would have caught. Just a small, involuntary tightening of her whole body, like some part of her had learned to brace before contact. The therapist had explanations for this too. Serena had heard them all, had taken notes, had followed every recommendation. Still felt like being hit every single time. "Sweetheart, it's okay. I'm here." Serena kept her voice steady. "Can you tell Mama what happened?" Ellie shook her head, kept crying. "Are you hurt?" Another head shake. "Are you scared?" Ellie pressed her face against her knees and didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. One of the hotel employees stepped forward again. "Ma'am, we've called for." "Give her space," Serena said, quietly, but the woman stopped moving immediately. The corridor went tense. 8 adults, all of them trying to help, all of them watching a 5-year-old cry, none of them knowing what to do next. The overhead fluorescent tube buzzed very slightly. Somewhere further down the corridor, a door opened and closed. Then Serena heard something land softly on the concrete floor nearby. She looked up. A man had come around the far end of the corridor, not hurrying, not making any particular show of urgency. He was carrying a mop bucket, and he'd left it at the corridor entrance and walked maybe 10 or 12 feet closer before stopping. He was tall, somewhere in his mid-30s, with the kind of face that didn't announce anything right away. He wore the hotel's janitorial uniform. He held a cleaning cloth in both hands. He did not look at the cluster of people around Ellie. He sat down on the floor. Just sat down, cross-legged, like he had nowhere particular to be, and set the cloth in his lap. One of the hotel managers started toward him. Serena held up one hand without looking away from the man, and the manager stopped. The man began folding the cloth. He wasn't doing it the way you fold a cloth to put it away. He was doing something deliberate, a corner here, a tuck there, a shape forming slowly in his hands. He wasn't talking. He wasn't making eye contact with anyone. He was simply sitting on the floor of a fluorescent-lit service corridor, folding a cleaning rag, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ellie's crying changed. It didn't stop, not immediately, but the frequency shifted. That desperate, compressed quality began to ease slightly, replaced by something less mechanical. Serena watched her daughter's shoulders drop a fraction, watched Ellie's face turn, almost without meaning to, in the direction of the man on the floor. He still wasn't looking at her. The cloth in his hands had become something. Serena couldn't make out exactly what from this angle, but whatever it was, its ears were uneven, and one side listed slightly to the left. Ellie sniffled. The man held up the cloth shape and examined it with an expression of mild professional disappointment, the way a craftsman might look at a piece that didn't quite come out right. Something close to a sound came from Ellie's direction. Not a laugh, not yet. But the space where a laugh might eventually exist. The man tilted the cloth shape sideways and studied it from a new angle. His head slightly, adjusted one of the ears. "It's a rabbit," Ellie said. Her voice was stuffed and uneven from crying, but it was a voice. The man looked up for the first time, not at Serena, not at any of the surrounding staff. He looked directly at Ellie with an expression that was matter-of-fact without being cold. "Supposed to be," he said, "working on it." "One ear is too big," Ellie told him.
Yeah.
He turned the rabbit in his hands. "I know. Can you fix it?" "Probably not. You want it anyway?" Ellie didn't answer right away. She looked at the cloth rabbit with the same focused seriousness she'd given the fake flowers earlier. Then she looked at the man, then back at the rabbit. She stood up. Serena's hand moved involuntarily toward her daughter, then stopped. Ellie walked across 8 feet of concrete floor, past 3 hotel employees who had been unable to reach her, past her own mother, who had knelt in front of her, and she stopped in front of the man sitting cross-legged on the floor and held out her hand. He placed the lopsided cloth rabbit in her palm. Ellie looked at it. She turned it over once. She tucked it carefully against her chest, and she smiled. It was not a polite smile, not the careful, managed expression Serena had been watching her daughter produce for 8 months as a way of getting through situations. It was a real, one sudden and unguarded, the kind that arrived before a child can think to control it, lighting up her whole face for 2 or 3 seconds before it settled into something quieter. Serena Blackwood, who had not cried in a boardroom in her entire career, who had held herself together through the legal process of her divorce and the pediatric therapy appointments and every sleepless 3A. She'd spent on the couch staring at the ceiling, felt something break open in her chest, quiet as a seam giving way. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment, breathed. The man on the floor didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't make anything of it. He said to Ellie, "You got a name?" "Ellie." "Noah." He didn't offer to shake her hand, just stated it, like they were 2 people passing in a hallway. "That's a good name." "I know," Ellie said, with a seriousness that startled a small sound of something out of the hotel manager nearby. "How come you were crying?" Ellie thought about this. "I got lost and everybody kept coming really close and I wanted them to stop." "Yeah," Noah said. "That makes sense. Not you're safe now, or there's nothing to be scared of, or any of the other reasonable and well-meaning things the surrounding adults had spent 10 minutes saying. Just that makes sense delivered without drama, without therapeutic weight, like a statement of ordinary fact." Ellie seemed to appreciate that more than anything else that had happened in the past half hour. "This is Piper," said a new voice. Serena looked past the janitorial cart at the corridor entrance, where a girl of about 8 had appeared, holding a backpack over both shoulders with the self-possessed patience of a child accustomed to waiting for a parent. She had the same dark, watchful quality around the eyes as the man on the floor. "That's my daughter," Noah said to Ellie, without making a production of it. "She waits for me here on Saturdays." "I have my own backpack too," Ellie said. "It has a bear on it. Mine has lightning bolts." Piper offered, crossing the corridor and sitting down on the floor near her father, with the easy comfort of someone who had done this before, sat on floors beside him in various locations, in various circumstances. "Do you like lightning bolts?" "I think so," Ellie said. "Do you want to see inside?" Ellie looked back at Serena once, a quick, instinctive check, and Serena nodded, keeping her face open even though her throat was still tight. Ellie sat down on the floor next to Piper. Serena straightened up slowly from where she'd been crouching. Her knees registered the concrete. She stood, and for a moment she just watched the 2 girls on the floor and the man nearby, all three of them involved in the inspection of Piper's backpack contents. The surrounding hotel staff gradually reading the situation correctly and quietly beginning to disperse. She looked at Noah. He glanced up. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, looked back at the girls, like it was done and didn't require anything else. Serena had spent her entire career learning how to read people when someone wanted something from her, when they were performing, when they were managing an angle. It was a skill she'd developed out of necessity, a survival mechanism in environments where everyone always wanted something. She watched Noah Callahan watching her daughter laugh for the first time in months, and she could not find a single angle. She had no framework for what she was looking at. None of the categories applied. She stood in that service corridor for another moment, breathing, while her daughter soared through an 8-year-old's backpack on a concrete floor and held a lopsided cloth rabbit against her chest. Then she flagged Rosa, confirmed everything was under control, and pulled out her phone again, not to call Daniel, not to reconnect to the board call, not to deal with the counterbid that was waiting for her attention like a fire that had been banked but not extinguished. She wanted to know the name of the Saturday janitor on the East Wing shift, because something had happened in that corridor that Serena Blackwood did not understand, and she had a particular and long-standing intolerance for things she did not understand. Going to understand this one. The name took Serena less than 4 minutes to obtain. She asked the event coordinator, who passed the question to the facilities manager, who pulled up a weekend shift roster on a tablet and told her, "Noah Callahan, Saturday East Wing rotation, been with the hotel 14 months. That was the entire file. Name, assignment, tenure. Nothing else that explained anything. Serena folded that information away and went back to the girls. Ellie had graduated from inspecting Piper's backpack to sitting beside her on the corridor floor. The two of them apparently engaged in a debate about whether a small rubber eraser shaped like a pineapple was better than a regular one. Noah had moved to the corridor entrance and was standing with one shoulder against the wall. Not hovering over them, not performing attentiveness, just present in the loose, unfussy way of someone who had spent a long time being responsible for another person's safety without making that person feel watched. Serena observed this without making it obvious she was observing it. She had learned a long time ago that the most useful information came from people who didn't know they were being studied. In negotiations, in boardrooms, in the half-second after someone received news they hadn't prepared for, that was when the real data arrived. Not what people said. What they did when they weren't thinking about it. What Noah Callahan did when he wasn't thinking about it was stand near his daughter without crowding her and let her manage her own interaction with a stranger while remaining close enough to matter if something went wrong. He didn't check his phone. He didn't make conversation with the remaining hotel staff, who were now filtering back toward their assigned areas. He just stood there, comfortable in his own silence, in the way that people are only comfortable in silence when they've spent a lot of time in it. Rosa appeared at Serena's shoulder. "Are you ready to take Ellie upstairs? The room is prepared. Give me a few more minutes." Rosa gave her a look that was professional enough to be deniable but communicated clearly. "You've already been saying a few more minutes for the past 20. Serena walked over to where Noah was standing. He didn't straighten up or adjust his posture when she approached. Most people did. Around her, some instinctive response to proximity that she'd noticed over the years. A subtle squaring of the shoulders, a shift into performance. He just turned his head slightly and waited. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I'm going to be direct because I don't have a lot of patience for the other approach." "Okay. What did you do? With Ellie? What was the actual thinking behind it?" Noah looked at her for a moment. Not like the question was difficult, more like he was deciding whether a real answer was worth the length it would take. "She was overwhelmed," he said finally. "Every time someone got close, it got worse. So I stopped getting close. That's it? Pretty much. Gave her something small to look at. Stayed low. Let her make the call about whether to come over." He paused. Kids that age, when they're that scared, they're not scared of the thing that started it anymore. They're scared of losing control of what happens next. You give them one decision they can make themselves. They start to settle. Serena looked at him. "That's not a standard hotel training module." "No," he agreed without elaborating. "Where does it come from?" He glanced toward the girls on the floor, and something moved briefly behind his expression, not quite a flinch, but a closing off, like a window being pulled to. "Different context," he said. "Long time ago." She understood that he was done with that line of questions. She also understood, with the precision that came from years of reading negotiating partners, that pushing on it right now would cost her something. She filed it. "I'd like to do something for you," she said. "Compensation for your time." He looked at her with an expression that was hard to read because it wasn't performing anything in particular. "I didn't do anything that took time," he said. "I was already in the corridor. You helped my daughter. She helped herself. I just stopped getting in the way. Mr. Callahan." Serena kept her voice even, but she put a particular weight behind it, the weight she used when she needed someone to understand she was serious and not interested in the ceremonial part of the exchange. "I'm going to offer you something, and I'd like you to accept it. Not because you need it, maybe, but because it would make me feel better about walking out of this corridor." Something shifted in his face very slightly, but she caught it. Not offense. Something more like reluctant amusement that he wasn't quite willing to show. "How much?" he said. She named a number. He was quiet for a moment. "Then that's a lot for 15 minutes in a service corridor." "It's not for the 15 minutes. It's for the outcome." "No," he said. Not "I couldn't possibly" or "that's very generous," but just no, plainly. The way people say no when they mean it, rather than when they're hoping to be talked into yes. Serena had heard 1,000 variations of the performative refusal over the course of her career. This was not that. She studied him. "Why not? Because I didn't do it for that," he said. And taking money for it would change what it was. That was not the answer she had expected. She turned it over once, looking for the angle, the calculation, and didn't find one. Which meant he either genuinely meant it or he was the most sophisticated person she'd encountered in years, and standing in a hotel service corridor in a janitorial uniform was a very long play. She didn't think it was a very long play. "All right," she said. He nodded, looked back toward Piper and Ellie. The two girls had apparently concluded the eraser debate and moved on to something else. Ellie was demonstrating something with her hands, and Piper was watching with the slightly exaggerated interest that older children produce for younger ones when they're being kind. Ellie was still holding the cloth rabbit. "She doesn't do that," Serena said, without meaning to say it out loud. "Warm up to people that fast. She hasn't in a long time." Noah didn't respond immediately. Then carefully, "How long?" 8 months, roughly. Serena kept her eyes on her daughter. "Since we had some changes at home. She's been in therapy. She's doing better, but..." She stopped, because she hadn't intended to say any of this to a stranger in a hotel corridor, and she wasn't sure why she was continuing. "She usually takes much longer." Noah said nothing, which turned out to be the right response. "What she said to you," Serena said. "That makes sense. When she told you why she was scared." Nobody had said that to her yet. Everyone kept telling her she was fine. She wasn't fine, Noah said. She was doing what made sense, given what was happening to her. "No, I know. Serena stopped again. "That's the point I'm making." There was a pause that wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but had weight to it. "I should get her upstairs," Serena said. "She needs to eat something and she's going to crash soon." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." "I mean it, Noah," he said. She looked at him. "You can drop the Mr. Callahan," he said. "It's a long name for a short conversation." That almost made her smile. She kept it contained. "Serena," she said. He nodded once. She walked back to her daughter. She told herself, on the drive back to the suite that evening, that her interest in Noah Callahan was purely practical, the reasonable curiosity of someone who had witnessed something effective and wanted to understand the mechanism. She applied this logic to most things she didn't have an explanation for, and it usually held. By the following Monday, she had asked her assistant to run a more detailed background check. Standard procedure for anyone who had made significant contact with Ellie, that was the rationale she used, and it was not entirely untrue. The file came back Tuesday afternoon. She read it twice. Noah Elliott Callahan, 37, 10 years in the Navy. Honorably discharged 6 years ago. 3 combat deployments. His service record was partially classified, but the notation attached to his unit designation was enough naval special warfare. SEAL teams. He had never mentioned it. Not in the corridor, not when she'd pressed him about his background, not when she'd given him what was essentially an opening to use it. Personal history was briefer and harder. Married at 29 to a woman named Claire. Piper born the following year. Divorced at 34 shortly before his discharge. He had primary custody of Piper. Current residence, a rental property in the Eastwick neighborhood, not a wealthy part of the city. Currently employed by Meridian Facilities Group, the contractor that serviced the Cresthaven Grand's custodial operations. Weekend shift East Wing. Had worked there 14 months. No legal record. No complaints. Serena sat with the file for a while. Then she called her head of personal security, a former FBI agent named Dwight Harmon, and told him she needed 40 minutes of his time. She laid out what she wanted, a quiet, informal review of the incident at the hotel. Not an official report, just Dwight's eyes on the circumstances. Something had been nagging at her since the corridor. Something she hadn't been able to articulate until she slept on it twice and then woke up at 5:10 on Wednesday morning. With it fully formed, Ellie had not simply wandered. Ellie did not wander. That was not who Ellie was. Ellie stayed close. Ellie held 2 fingers. Ellie checked back over her shoulder before she sat down with a stranger. The child who had walked 60 feet through an unfamiliar door into a service corridor alone, under circumstances where Rosa had been standing directly with her, was not the Ellie that Serena knew. "Look at the maintenance door," she told Dwight, "the one at the East Wing entrance to that corridor, and pull the camera footage for that section. All of it, from 2 hours before we arrived." Dwight looked at her with the even, professionally neutral expression he used when he thought something was either very or slightly paranoid, and wasn't sure which. "You think it wasn't an accident? I think I want to know for certain that it was." She also, without fully deciding to, called the hotel's facilities scheduling line that afternoon and asked whether Noah Callahan was working Saturday. He was. She brought Ellie back on Saturday without planning anything specific and spent 40 minutes sits in the hotel's East Wing lounge while Ellie ate a sandwich and drew in the small notebook she carried everywhere. At some point, Piper appeared near the corridor entrance with her backpack, which by now Serena understood was simply what Saturday looked like. For the Callahan family, Piper came after her Saturday morning activity. Noah finished his shift rotation. They went home together. Ellie spotted Piper before Serena said anything. She looked up from her notebook, and something animated in her face in the immediate, uncomplicated way it used to, before the year things went wrong in the house on Clearview Street. "Can I go say hi?" "Finish your sandwich first. I'm done." "You have 3 bites left." Ellie ate the 3 bites in approximately 40 seconds. Serena let her go. She watched her daughter cross the lounge and stop in front of Piper with a shyness that lasted about 90 seconds before both girls sat down on the carpet near the wall and Piper opened her backpack. Whatever was in there this week apparently required both hands to examine properly. Noah came around the corner a few minutes later with a cart, saw Piper and Ellie, registered Serena across the lounge, and paused. He left the cart near the corridor entrance and walked over. "I wasn't expecting you back," he said. "We had reasons to be in the building." This was technically true. "Is it a problem?" "No." He sat down in the chair across from her with the same no-ceremony quality he'd had in the corridor, not slouching, not performing relaxation, just occupying the chair without making an event of it. "Piper will be here until I'm done." "Another hour." "I know. I thought Ellie might want to see her." He glanced at his daughter and Ellie on the floor across the room. "She's been asking about Ellie all week," he said, and then seemed to notice that this was more information than he'd intended to give, and closed off slightly. "Ellie's been asking about Piper," Serena said. "And the rabbit. Does she still have it?" "She sleeps with it." Something crossed his face, not quite a smile, but something that existed in the same neighborhood. He looked down at the table for a moment, then back up. "How's she doing?" "Better than she was Saturday," Serena said. "Which is," she stopped, picked the honest version of the sentence. "Which is something I wasn't sure I was going to be able to say for a while." He nodded, and didn't make it into more than it was. She looked at him. He was watching the girls again in that same way, present without crowding. She wondered if he knew he did it, or if it had become so automatic he no longer noticed. "I looked you up," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not surprised, she thought. More like he'd been waiting for it. "I figured," he said. "You didn't mention it. In the corridor. Didn't seem relevant. You were a Navy SEAL for 10 years, and it didn't seem relevant to folding a cleaning rag into a rabbit." He looked at her. "No, it didn't." She held his gaze. Was it what?" "Relevant. Did what you did with Ellie, the way you read the situation, the distance, giving her something to focus on, did that come from training?" He considered this for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Then, some of it. In that environment, you learn pretty fast that force makes things worse when someone's already passed a certain threshold. You learn to read what's actually happening versus what it looks like. You stop talking and start watching. He paused. The rabbit was just a rabbit. It worked. She worked, he said. I keep telling you that. You keep being more generous about it than the situation calls for. Or you keep giving more credit than the situation calls for. They looked at each other for a moment, and Serena became aware that this was a different kind of conversation than she usually had, not faster or slower, not more or less efficient, just operating on a different register, one where the thing being communicated wasn't entirely the thing being said. Broke it by looking back at her daughter. Dwight, my security director, he looked at the footage from last Saturday. Noah waited. The door at the east wing entrance to that service corridor, she said. It was supposed to be locked. It's locked every other day on the footage. Saturday it wasn't. I know, Noah said. She looked at him sharply. You already. I went back and looked at it Monday, he said. After the shift. The corridor's part of my rotation. And? He was quiet for a moment. The camera on the hallway outside, the one that covers the stretch between the ballroom entrance and that service door. It was turned. Not broken. Not blocked. Turned about 12 degrees, which puts the door just outside its field of view. Serena's jaw tightened. She kept her expression even. When was it turned? Sometime between Friday night and Saturday morning. Between the last camera check and the start of my shift. That's a very specific window. Yeah. She looked at him. You have an old instinct that's telling you something. It wasn't a question. He seemed to recognize that. Something was set up, he said. I don't know what for. I don't know why. But that combination door unlocked. Camera adjusted. A 5-year-old left standing near that section for long enough. That's not a coincidence sitting on top of another coincidence. Who would do that and why? I don't know yet. He paused. What's happening in your professional life right now that someone might want to disrupt? Question landed with a precision that made her breath catch slightly. Not because she didn't have an answer, she had an immediate one, but because she hadn't expected him to think in those terms, or to say it that directly. A significant acquisition, she said. Technology company. The deal closes in 72 hours. Who loses if it closes? Several people. She said it carefully. 3 competing firms who've been trying to position themselves in the same space. And anyone inside my organization who might have made arrangements with those firms. Inside your organization, he said. It's not impossible. She'd been sitting with that possibility for months, not because she had evidence, but because she'd learned over a decade of building a company that the most dangerous threats were rarely the ones that announced themselves from outside. I have no way to prove it. You have access records, he said. Schedule changes, camera logs, maintenance requests. Kind of things that somebody has to touch to set something like this up. She looked at him. People leave traces, Noah said. Not because they're careless. Because something has to physically happen for a door to be unlocked, and a camera to be moved, and a child to end up in a corridor. Every one of those things requires a person to do it. You sound like you want to look for those traces. He was quiet. Across the room, Ellie was showing Piper something in her notebook, and Piper was leaning in with the expression of someone being shown classified information. If someone deliberately put Ellie in a situation where she could be frightened, Noah said, and something in his voice had changed. Very slightly. The same way the temperature in a room changes before a storm, and you don't notice it until you're already cold, then yes. I want to find that person. That's not your job, Serena said. No, he agreed. It would require you to spend time and attention on something that's not what they're paying you to do. Yeah, she waited. He didn't walk it back. You'd need access, she said, to schedules, to the hotel's maintenance request logs, parts of my organization's internal calendar. That would help. She thought about it. She thought about Dwight, who was good at the standard operational side of security, but had spent 14 months missing things that could apparently be found by a janitor who'd been employed there for the same length of time. She thought about Ellie sitting in the corridor crying while 12 people tried to reach her. She thought about the cloth rabbit. This doesn't go through my organization, she said. If someone inside it is compromised, then anything you find has to stay between us until we know who's involved. Understood. And if you find something, you bring it to me first, before anyone else. Yes, and nothing, he said. She looked at him. You're not paying me for this, he said. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it for the same reason I said before, because of Ellie. He held her gaze. Because if someone deliberately put a child in danger as a tactic, he said, then I want to know who it was. Serena studied him for a long moment. There was something difficult about reading a person who wasn't trying to manage what you saw. Not because there was nothing there, but because it was all just sitting on the surface, undisguised, and therefore harder to categorize. "All right," she said. "When can you start?" He looked past her to where Piper and Ellie sat on the floor, the notebook now open between them, Ellie pointing at something on the page with the focused authority of someone explaining a complex system. "I already did," he said. What followed was not glamorous. It was not fast. It was spreadsheets pulled from hotel management systems at 11 at night, maintenance logs cross-referenced against Serena's own executive schedule, camera rotation records requested through the facilities manager under the cover of a routine audit that Serena's arranged through a property management contact so that no one inside her organization knew she was looking. Noah worked his shift. He went home, got Piper through dinner and homework, put her to bed. Then he sat at a second-hand table in the kitchen of his Eastwick rental, with a laptop, and the kind of patience that most people couldn't sustain past the first hour of nothing happening. He had learned a long time ago that most things, the kind of things that went wrong in ways that hurt people, started as the small adjustments. Schedule moved by 20 minutes. A request filed under the wrong department code. A door left unlocked on a day when someone knew it would matter. None of it looked like anything from the right distance. The wrong distance was the only view most people had. He had the right distance now. By the end of the second week, he had a pattern. It was incomplete gaps in the data that he couldn't fill without access. He didn't have yet, but a pattern nonetheless. 3 separate incidents across the past 4 months where Serena's movement schedule had been quietly adjusted in ways that gave her less security coverage than standard procedure called for. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just slightly. In ways that would read as ordinary scheduling friction if you weren't looking at all 3 simultaneously. The hotel maintenance logs showed 2 previous instances of camera realignment in sections Serena regularly passed through. Both had been corrected the next day, filed as equipment drift. Neither had resulted in an incident. This time, something had gone further. Someone had been escalating, and someone had been doing it from close enough to know Serena's itinerary in detail, not the public calendar, not the information any competent investigator could piece together from her company's public appearances. The internal itinerary, the version only her executive team saw. Noah looked at that conclusion for a long time. Then he made a list of every person with access to that document. There were 11 names. He did not share the list with Serena yet. He needed 3 more things before the picture was specific enough to be useful, and specific enough to be safe, because the one thing he understood clearly from everything he'd done before this job, before this city, before the rental in Eastwick, and the Saturday shifts, and Piper's backpack with the lightning bolts, was that a half-formed accusation was more dangerous than no accusation at all. You found the whole thing first. Then you moved. He closed the laptop at 1:15 in the morning. Down the hall, he could hear Piper breathing in the easy, unconscious rhythm of a child deep under. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, in the dark, listening to that sound. He'd made a promise when he came home. Not to anyone else. Piper was too young then to hold him to promises, and Claire had already been a different conversation by that point. Promise was to himself, which in some ways made it harder to break, because there was no negotiating with your own memory of the moment you made it. He had promised that no job would take him away again. Not the way the last one had. Not the years of absences strung together into a life that happened without him in it. Coming home to a daughter who didn't immediately know how to be in the same room as him, to a marriage that had slowly stopped knowing what to do with who he was when he came back. He wasn't sure exactly what this was, this thing he was doing for Serena Blackwood at 1 in the morning, with a spreadsheet and a dead-end feeling in his chest. He wasn't sure it constituted breaking the promise. He went to bed. In the morning, Piper made him eat cereal with the wrong kind of milk, because that was what they had. And she told him about a project she was doing in school, about ecosystems. And he listened to the whole thing twice because the first time she told it, she realized she'd explained one part wrong and started over. He thought, this is what I came home for. He thought, then make sure nobody touches it. He picked up his car keys and drove to work. The 3rd week, Noah stopped sleeping well. Not because of Piper, she was fine. She was always fine in the uncomplicated way that 8-year-olds are fine when their lives are stable and their father comes home at the same time every day and there is food in the refrigerator and a predictable tomorrow. Piper's sleep was the deep, untroubled kind. Noah could hear it through the wall on the nights he lay awake in his own room, with the ceiling fan turning, and his mind running the data again from the beginning. The pattern was getting clearer, and that was precisely what was keeping him up. Cleaner picture meant a worse situation. He had learned this in other contexts. The moment an operation came into focus was rarely a relief. Usually it meant the problem was bigger than the initial read, and the initial read was already bad enough to have gotten people's attention. He had 11 names on his list, people with routine access to Serena's internal itinerary. He'd been working through them the only way available to him, not through interrogation, not through any authority he didn't have, but through time and paper. What each person's schedule looked like on the days the cameras were adjusted, who had filed maintenance requests in the relevant corridors, whose access badge records put them in proximity to things that shouldn't have been touched. By the third week, he was down to 4 names. By the end of the fourth week, he was down to 1. Gavin Rourke, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development at Blackwood Industries. 14 years with the company. Serena had hired him herself, early in her tenure as CEO, when she was still building the executive team from scratch, and Rourke had come with a reputation for deal-making that his resume mostly supported. He was 51. He dressed well. He had the particular social fluency of someone who had spent decades in rooms where social fluency was a professional tool, the right amount of warmth, the right amount of deference, the ability to make people feel heard without giving them anything substantive. Noah had never met him. He knew the type. What Rourke had was access not just to Serena's internal calendar, but to the specific subdirectory where her security itineraries were filed. That access was logged. Noah had spent 3 evenings working backward through the hotel's maintenance request system against Blackwood Industries' internal scheduling records, which Serena had quietly pulled for him through an outside IT contact she trusted, careful to leave no internal trace of the request. The picture that assembled itself was not a simple one. Rourke had not acted alone, and he had not acted impulsively. Camera realignments, all 3 of them, going back 4 months, had each followed within 48 hours of a significant development in the Arcean acquisition. The first one came after Serena publicly confirmed Blackwood's interest in the deal. The second came after the preliminary valuation was filed. The third, the one that had put Ellie in a service corridor, came 6 days before the deal was scheduled to close. Someone was watching the acquisition's timeline and responding to it. And someone with access to Serena's internal security schedules had been feeding information to that someone about when and where she would be and where Ellie would be, with enough precision to exploit the window that Saturday. The question Noah kept coming back to was, what was the endgame? Because the incidents themselves, the cameras, the unlocked door, they hadn't produced anything. No kidnapping, no direct threat, no confrontation. Each time, the manipulation had been set up, and then either abandoned or interrupted before it could produce a visible result. Which meant the result itself wasn't the point. He thought about this for a long time, lying on his back in the dark with the ceiling fan turning. What you do when you can't beat someone outright is you make them unable to perform. You don't take the thing they have. You make them too unsteady to use it. Serena was 48 hours from closing a deal that would reshape her industry. She was also a recently divorced mother of a 5-year-old who had already been showing signs of emotional fragility. The incidents hadn't been designed to kidnap Ellie. They'd been designed to terrify Serena. Repeated, escalating scares around her daughter until she was too frightened, too distracted, too destabilized to sit across a table from a board and close a billion-dollar acquisition with the clarity it required. The math was cold, but it was sound, and it meant the person behind it understood Serena well enough to know exactly where she was most exposed. Noah sat up in bed at 2 a.m. and sent Serena a message. I need to talk to you. Not by phone. Can you be at the hotel Saturday morning before your event? She replied in 4 minutes, yes. What did you find? He typed, enough. See you Saturday. She was there when he arrived for his shift. Not in the lobby, she was smarter than that, and careful about being seen in extended conversation with hotel staff in spaces where her own people might be present. She was in a small conference room off the east corridor that she had booked under a subsidiary company name, one of those bland, windowless rooms that hotels keep available for exactly the kind of meeting that needs to not look like a meeting. He knocked. She opened the door herself, no assistant, no Rosa, no Dwight. She looked like she had not been sleeping particularly well, either, which was the first time he'd seen that on her face. She usually carried herself with the sealed, forward-facing composure of someone who had decided a long time ago that she would not let difficulty show in her posture. Today there were edges showing. Sit down, she said. Tell me what you have. He sat. He laid out what he'd found in the order he'd found it, not to build drama, but because the order was the logic, and the logic was the only thing that made the conclusion credible. She listened the way she listened to everything, without interrupting, without letting her expression confirm or deny what she was hearing, with a stillness that he'd initially read as composure and now recognized as something more effortful than that. She was working very hard to stay in the receiving part of this conversation and not move into the responding part before he was done. He got to Rourke's name. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Say that again." "Gavin Rourke," he said. She looked at the table, not at him. At the table for about 5 seconds, with an expression that moved through several things he didn't try to name. Then she said, "Show me." He opened the laptop and walked her through it. The access logs, the maintenance records, the timeline laid against the acquisition's milestones, the pattern of camera adjustments and what they had in common. She looked at everything without speaking. She scrolled back twice on the maintenance records page and read it again. She was not a person who accepted conclusions without examining the evidence that led to them, which he had expected and planned for. Everything he showed her was documentable, traceable, the kind of thing that held up under scrutiny rather than collapsing the moment someone pressed it. "He's been with my company for 14 years, she said finally. "I know. He was in the room when I made some of the most important decisions of the last decade." "Yeah." She looked at him. "That's not doubt. That's just I'm saying it out loud so it's real." She looked back at the screen. "What's his connection to the other side? Who's he working with?" "There's a firm called Mercer Vantage Capital. They've been trying to position for Arcean for 2 years. They lost a bid 18 months ago. Serena, you outmaneuvered them on valuation and they couldn't recover. They've been quiet since then." He paused. Too quiet, it turns out. "I found 3 transfers from a shell account connected to a Mercer Vantage subsidiary to an account registered in the name of a consulting firm. That consulting firm has 1 client on record. 1 single client. Rourke," she said. "A company Rourke's brother-in-law owns, technically. But the beneficial ownership structure points back to Rourke inside 2 steps." She was very still. "How much?" 3 payments. Total of just under $400,000 over 6 months. She absorbed that. "That's enough to expose him." "It's enough to start," Noah said. "Access logs and the maintenance timeline are circumstantial individually. Together with the financial transfers, they establish both motive and mechanism. You'd want a forensic accounting firm to go deeper on the money. I don't have the access for that, but what I have is enough to know where to look." Serena leaned back in her chair. She was not a person who rubbed her temples or put her head in her hands when things went wrong. He had observed this consistently across their interactions. What she did was go very quiet and very focused, like a system that had just rerouted around a failed component and was busy recalculating. "The gala," she said. "What about it? The acquisition gala. 4 days away. The formal closing ceremony, the one where I sign in front of the board, and the independent oversight panel. It's been on my internal calendar for 6 weeks. She looked at him. If Rourke is watching the acquisition timeline and responding to milestones, the gala is the last milestone. The final one. Noah thought about that. "He knows the deal is 48 hours from close," Serena said. "He's been escalating. The first 2 camera incidents produced nothing. Corridor incident produced nothing except..." She stopped. "Except you got spooked," Noah said. Not unkindly. "I didn't postpone anything." "No, but he couldn't know that for certain. He may have expected you to." He paused. "When you didn't, he'd need to try something bigger." "The gala," she said. "That would be my red." They looked at each other across the small conference table. "I'm not postponing the gala," Serena said. "I didn't suggest you should. And I'm not going to Dwight with this yet. If Rourke has someone feeding him information about my security operations." "He might," Noah said. "I don't have evidence of that. But the precision of what he's been doing suggests he's getting current information about your schedule. Not just the calendar, the actual operational detail." Serena nodded slowly. "Which means anyone I brief inside my security operation is a potential leak. Until we know who else is involved. Yes. So it's you and me." Noah looked at her. It was a slightly absurd sentence in the context. Her in a $1,200 blazer with a company worth 9 figures. Him in a janitorial uniform with a mop bucket in the hallway outside. "And Dwight," he said. "But I'd wait until closer to the event to read him in. Last minute. Not enough time for it to travel through whatever channel Rourke is using." "Agreed." She was already thinking through something. He could tell her eyes had gone to the middle distance in the particular way they did when she was running probabilities. He won't come at me directly. He never has. He manufactures situations. He'll try to separate you from the meeting, Noah said. Some kind of emergency or diversion that pulls you out of the room at the critical moment. And simultaneously because he'll have learned from the corridor something around Ellie. Serena looked at him sharply. If the first play was to frighten you through Ellie, he said, and it didn't work. The escalation is to make the threat more concrete, not a lost child. An attempt to remove her. She's not coming to the gala, Serena said immediately. I know, but he may not know that yet, or he may have a contingency. He paused. Where is she that night? My mother's. Across town. Does that appear on your internal calendar? Serena was quiet for a beat. Probably, then assume he knows. Noah kept his voice level. Tell your mother to change her locks this week if she hasn't recently, and not to open the door for anyone she doesn't know. Don't explain why, just do it. And have someone you trust, outside your organization, available to be in that building that night. Serena was looking at him, with an expression he hadn't seen on her before, not the controlled composure, not the professional acuity. Something with more raw material in it. You think he'd go after a 5-year-old? I think he already did, Noah said. The corridor. He just didn't finish it. The room was quiet for a moment. The ventilation system hummed above them. He won't this time either, Serena said. And the tone of it was not a hope, it was a statement of intent, the kind that arrived from someplace past fear and into the territory of something harder. Noah recognized that tone. He'd heard it in different voices in very different places. It was the sound of a person who had decided. No, he said. He won't. The 4 days between that conversation and the gala were the most careful of Noah's recent life, and his recent life had contained some careful days. He kept his shift schedule exactly as it was. He filed no unusual requests. He changed nothing that Rourke's information channels might notice and interpret as a signal that someone was watching. He went home, made dinner, helped Piper with a science worksheet about the water cycle, and sat at the kitchen table at night working through the remaining gaps in the evidence file. Because the evidence he had was enough to point a direction, but it wasn't yet enough to hold Rourke in place. Access logs and the maintenance records established pattern and opportunity. The financial transfers established motive and compensation. What he needed was the mechanism, the specific person or persons inside the hotel's operational structure who had physically adjusted the cameras and left the maintenance door unlocked. The hands that had done the work, which would tie Rourke directly to the incidents, rather than allowing him to argue that his access and his money were coincidental. He found the first name through the maintenance logs, a facilities technician named Bryce Carver, who had signed off on the camera drift reports both times, listing them as equipment malfunction corrected. Standard paperwork. Nothing unusual, unless you looked at Carver's badge records for those days, and noticed that he had accessed the camera junction panel before the official malfunction report, not after. You only accessed that panel to adjust cameras. You didn't stumble onto a malfunction and then go to the junction panel. You went to the junction panel and then filed the malfunction report as cover. Carver was freelance. He worked for 2 different facilities contractors in the city, one of which was the same Meridian Facilities Group that employed Noah. He had no direct connection to Rourke in any public record. But the shell company that had received Rourke's payments had made 2 additional smaller transactions, one to an account Noah couldn't fully trace, and one to a personal account registered at the same address as Bryce Carver's lease. Not enough to take to a prosecutor. Enough to know. The second name took until the day before the gala, and came from a direction he hadn't expected. He had been working through Serena's internal calendar access records when he found a pattern he'd initially skipped because it seemed too peripheral, a personal assistant named Lydia Marsh, who worked for Rourke directly, not for Serena. She had no formal access to Serena's security itinerary. But she had access to Rourke's calendar, and Rourke's calendar contained a recurring block labeled simply SR coordination that had been scheduled and then removed from the visible shared calendar but remained in the raw log file. SR, Serena's initials in Rourke's coordination shorthand. He sat with that for a while. Rourke had been receiving Serena's security itinerary details from someone. He'd assumed the leak was lateral someone at Serena's level or below in her security chain. But if Lydia Marsh was acting as a conduit, receiving information and passing it to Rourke, the actual source of the leak was still unidentified. Someone was giving it to Marsh, who was giving it to Rourke. He didn't have time to find the original source before the gala. He had to accept that limitation. What he had was a picture with enough resolution to act on. He called Serena at 9 the night before. She picked up on the second ring. Carver is his inside man at the hotel, Noah said. Facilities technician. He did the cameras. I think he also has a key to the maintenance sections, or had access to one the day the corridor door was left open. How sure are you? Sure enough. Not courtroom sure. Operational sure. She understood the distinction. Rourke's assistant, Lydia Marsh, how does she fit? She's a conduit. Someone is getting your security details to her, and she's passing them to Rourke. I don't know who the original source is. I ran out of time on that end. I think I know, Serena said. He waited. There's a woman in my security scheduling office named Paula Green. She and Rourke were in the same MBA program 30 years ago. I didn't know that until this week. I found it when I was going back through the org chart looking for connections. She paused. I don't have proof. Add it to what we have, Noah said. It's consistent. What does tomorrow look like? She asked. Walk me through what you think he'll do. He had thought about this carefully. He'll need two things to happen simultaneously for maximum effect. You pulled out of the acquisition room at the critical moment, and a secondary incident that gives him leverage or buys confusion while he does whatever he's trying to do with the board. I think there's a false alarm of some kind. An emergency message routed to you through a channel that looks credible, your assistant, your phone, something official looking. Something that gets you moving toward a part of the building away from the meeting. And the secondary? Either something at your mother's or something in the building involving Ellie, except Ellie won't be there, which he may not know. Or he has a backup that doesn't require Ellie specifically. Just chaos. Something that makes your security team split their attention. Can you be in the building tomorrow night? I'm already on the schedule, he said. Saturday rotation runs into the evening because of the event setup. I need you to not be in uniform, she said. He was quiet. I need you mobile and unidentifiable, she said. Not a janitor that staff can dismiss or redirect. Someone who can move through the building without being stopped. Serena. He said her name carefully. I'm a contractor employee. If I'm in that building out of uniform without authorization, I own part of this hotel, she said. I'll authorize it. He thought about it for a moment. He thought about what happened the last time he'd said yes to something that started with, I need you to be something other than what you are right now. He also thought about Ellie in the corridor, about the cloth rabbit, about the specific expression on Serena's face when she'd said he won't, not a reassurance, a decision. All right, he said, but we read Dwight in tomorrow, 2 hours before the event, no earlier. Agreed. And if something happens in the building, if Rourke moves, you don't leave the acquisition room. Whatever the message says, whatever emergency appears, you don't move. You send someone else to verify it and you stay in that room. There was a pause. He knew what the pause was. She was the kind of person who moved toward problems, not away from them, and everything in her was fighting the instruction to stay put. Serena, I heard you. Do you agree? Another pause. Shorter. Yes, she said. I agree. And Ellie, she's at my mother's. I already called. I had a contractor change the locks this morning. Told my mother the old ones were showing wear. She believed it. Good. I also have a friend, Serena said. Woman I've known for 15 years. Not connected to the company, not connected to the hotel. She's going to be at my mother's building all evening. What does she know? That I'm dealing with the situation, and I'd feel better with another set of eyes near Ellie tonight. She asked no questions. Good friend, Noah said. Yes, Serena said, and the word carried something in it, a kind of quiet acknowledgement that she was lucky in that way, despite everything. He told her he'd be in the building by 5. The event started at 7. They agreed on a phone signal. 2 calls back to back meant something had started moving. He hung up and sat for a moment at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. Piper had been asleep for an hour. Through the window he could see the street outside, the neighborhood that wasn't much to look at, but was his in the way that places become yours when you live in them. Long enough the cracked sidewalk in front of the Delano family's house, the convenience store on the corner with the sign that was always half lit, the particular quality of the street light at this hour. He thought, I need to be careful tomorrow. Not because he was afraid of Rourke, specifically men like Rourke did not get their own hands dirty, which meant tomorrow's actual physical risk would come from someone like Carver, someone operating on instructions and money rather than on any particular commitment to the outcome. That type was manageable. He was careful because Piper was asleep in the next room, and careful was what that required of him now. Not recklessness, not the version of himself that had run toward problems without a second thought, because second thoughts hadn't seemed necessary. Put the laptop away. Washed the dinner dishes that had been sitting in the sink. Checked the front door lock twice, which was a habit so old he no longer noticed doing it. He went down the hall and stood in Piper's doorway for a moment. She was on her side, one arm around the stuffed dog she'd had since she was 3, which she would deny caring about if anyone her age asked. Her hair was fanned out against the pillow. Her breathing was slow and even. He stood there for exactly as long as he needed to. Then he went to bed. The Cresthaven Grand on a gala evening was a different building than the one Noah worked in on Saturday mornings. The lobby had been transformed floor lighting, fresh arrangements 3 feet taller than the ones Ellie had examined 2 weeks ago, staff in event black, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this particular performance enough times to execute it without visible effort. Guests were beginning to arrive in the kind of clothes that announced money without spelling it out. Noah had arrived at 5, as planned. He wore what Serena had arranged, a dark jacket, nondescript enough to read as building management or private security if no one looked too carefully. His hotel access badge was in his pocket, but he wasn't displaying it. He moved through the service corridors to orient himself first, checking the camera positions in the east and north wings against what he'd memorized from the facility maps, confirming that nothing new had been adjusted in the past 24 hours. Cameras were where they were supposed to be. That was either reassuring, or it meant whatever Rourke had planned didn't require camera blind spots this time. A more direct approach. At 6:40, he found Dwight Harmon in the small operations room the security team had set up off the main corridor. Dwight was 53, solid, with the slightly compressed quality of a man who had spent decades expecting problems and had learned not to show the expectation on his face. He looked at Noah with the careful neutrality of someone being asked to accept a situation he hadn't been briefed on and wasn't sure he liked. "She told me you'd be here," Dwight said. "Good. Then I don't need to explain the setup. She told me you found something. She didn't tell me what." Noah gave him the version that took 4 minutes enough to orient Dwight without overwhelming him with the details that didn't affect the operational picture. Rourke, the cameras, the financial connection, the likelihood of a diversion and a secondary incident tonight. Dwight listened without expression. When Noah finished, he said, "You're telling me one of her senior executives has been running a campaign to destabilize her acquisition by manufacturing threats around her child?" "Yes. And your evidence for this is access logs, maintenance records, and financial transfer data you put together from." He paused. "From your shift schedule. And some records Serena pulled through outside channels." Dwight looked at him for a moment. Not dismissively, more like a man recalculating something he'd thought he'd already calculated. "All right," he said. "What do you need from me?" "Rourke is coming tonight. He's on the guest list I checked. He'll be in the room for the early part of the event, and then he'll position himself to manage whatever he's set in motion. I need your team watching him from the moment he enters. Not obviously. Just don't lose him. And Carver? If Carver's in the building, check the facility's rotation. He may be on setup duty. I need to know where he is at all times. He's the active piece. Rourke doesn't move himself." Dwight nodded. "And Serena stays in the acquisition room from 7:30 until the signing is complete. Whatever happens elsewhere in the building, she doesn't come out until it's done." She agreed to that? She did. Dwight's expression suggested he was mildly surprised by this, but wasn't going to say so. "All right," he said. "What are you doing?" "I'm watching the building," Noah said. "The parts your team doesn't have eyes on." Dwight looked at him for another moment. Then he said, "You were SEAL teams. Long time ago." "Not that long," Dwight said, and went back to his radio. The event proceeded the way these events proceeded, with the architecture of elegance that required enormous invisible effort to maintain. Guests moved through the lobby and up to the second-level ballroom. Servers circulated. The kind of conversation happened that happens at these gatherings, which is to say a great deal of positioning dressed as socializing. Gavin Rourke arrived at 7:12. Noah was watching the lobby from the mezzanine level when Rourke came through the entrance tall, well-dressed, with the easy social performance of a man who had been in rooms like this for 30 years. He shook hands. He smiled. He moved through the lobby with the particular confidence of someone who believed they controlled the evening's outcome. Noah tracked him to the ballroom. Rourke positioned himself near the bar on the north side a spot with sightlines to both the room's main entrance and the corridor that led to the private executive suites where the acquisition signing was scheduled to take place. He was watching those corridors. He was waiting for something to start. Noah moved to the east stairwell and went down one level. He had been thinking for the past 4 days about the geography of Rourke's plan. A false emergency message to Serena, that part was straightforward. A text or call, routed through something that appeared credible. What he'd been less certain about was the secondary. Rourke knew Ellie wasn't in the building tonight. He'd had access to Serena's itinerary, which would have shown the plan for Ellie to be at her mother's. Which meant the secondary wasn't Ellie. The secondary was something else, something in the building, that would create enough noise and disruption to split security's attention, while the false emergency pulled Serena out of the acquisition room. Something that would buy Rourke time to do whatever he intended to do with the board in Serena's absence. Noah went through the possibilities while he moved through the service corridor on the lower level. Rourke didn't need much time. He needed maybe 15 minutes, enough to reach at least 2 board members privately and plant whatever seeds of doubt or alternative proposition he'd prepared. If Serena was absent from the room and Rourke was present with a counter-narrative, the signing could be delayed. Delayed was enough. A delayed deal in the final hours invited the counterbid from Mercer Vantage, which Rourke had likely coordinated with them to be ready to move the moment there was daylight. The whole plan was elegant in its ugly way, no obvious crime, no dramatic confrontation, just a series of manufactured circumstances that produced the outcome Rourke had been paid to produce. Noah came around a corner in the lower service corridor and found Bryce Carver. Carver was standing near a maintenance access panel on the east wall, the panel that controlled secondary power routing for the building's event systems. He was not working on it. He was standing near it with a small device in his hand that Noah recognized after a half-second as a radio transmitter. Carver heard Noah's footsteps and turned. He was in his early 30s, compact build, with the slightly startled expression of someone who had been waiting to do something and hadn't expected company. He looked at Noah. Noah looked at the device in his hand. "That panel controls the ballroom systems," Noah said. Power interruption at the right moment, right in the middle of the signing ceremony, would create exactly enough chaos to stop the signing, without it being attributable to anything. Carver stared at him. He was running something in his head: who this was, what this meant, what his options were. "I've been watching you for 3 weeks, Noah said. "Cameras in the East Wing. The maintenance door. 2 false malfunction reports you filed in March and May." He kept his voice even without heat. "I have all of it." Carver's posture shifted, the small, barely visible shift of someone deciding whether to run. Noah had seen that shift in people before. He knew exactly what it meant and exactly what came after it. "Don't," Noah said. Carver didn't run. He stood there, holding the transmitter, with the particular stillness of someone who has just understood that the situation they are in is not the one they thought they were in. "Put it down," Noah said. Carver set the transmitter on the floor. "Good," Noah said. He picked it up, stepped back. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Dwight's number, East Lower Corridor. "Carver. Now." Then he looked at Carver and said, "Who else is in the building working for Rourke tonight?" Carver said nothing. "I'm not a police officer," Noah said. "I'm not going to arrest you. But I am going to stand here until Dwight Harmon arrives. And what happens next for you depends significantly on what you tell me in the next 3 minutes." Carver looked at the floor, then at Noah, then at the floor again. He had the expression of a man who had agreed to do something for money without fully thinking through the part where someone caught him doing it. "There's a woman," Carver said, "named Kessler. She's on the waitstaff tonight. She's supposed to send a message to Blackwood's assistant. At 8 o'clock, it's supposed to look like it's coming from Blackwood's mother. Something about the kid being sick. Serena's daughter. Even with Ellie safe at her grandmother's, Rourke had engineered a false emergency around her, a message claiming something was wrong, designed to pull Serena out of the signing room and across town, chasing a crisis that didn't exist. Noah was already moving. He sent 2 calls back-to-back to Serena's number, the signal they'd agreed on. Then he called Dwight again, told him to find a waitress named Kessler before 8 o'clock and keep her away from any phone or messaging device, and to do it quietly without alerting the ballroom. He went up the east stairwell at a pace that was not a run, but was not far from one. The acquisition room was on the 3rd level. He reached the corridor outside it at 7:54. He could see through the glass panel that the board members were present, that the independent oversight representatives were at the table, that the acquisition documents were prepared, and that Serena was at the head of the table with the controlled, forward-facing composure that was simply who she was in rooms like that. She had not left. She was still there. Her phone was on the table in front of her, and as he watched through the glass, he saw it light up not with his calls, which she would have already seen, but with something else. She looked at the screen. She looked at it for 2 seconds. Then she turned it face down on the table and looked back at the documents in front of her. She stayed in the room. Noah exhaled slowly. He positioned himself in the corridor outside the acquisition room, not inside, not announcing himself, just present, available. The way you stood when the thing that mattered was in the room behind you, and your job was to make sure nothing reached it. Down the corridor, he could hear voices from the ballroom, the event proceeding, the elegant machinery of a gala running its course, unaware of what was happening in the building's lower levels and quiet corridors. At 8:03, his phone showed a text from Dwight, Kessler secured. Rourke is moving toward the executive corridor. Noah looked up. Gavin Rourke came around the corner of the third-floor corridor at 8:04, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed the evening was proceeding as planned. He was carrying a leather portfolio. He was wearing the expression of someone about to deliver news. He saw Noah standing outside the acquisition room door. He stopped. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the senior executive in his tailored jacket and the man in the dark jacket who had been cleaning this hotel's service corridors for 14 months. Rourke's expression moved through several things in quick succession: confusion, recalculation, the first edges of something that might eventually become alarm. "This is a restricted area," Rourke said. "I know," Noah said. He didn't move. "I need to speak with the board," Noah said. "You don't." Rourke looked at him. He was a man who had spent 30 years managing situations with words and leverage, and the careful application of social pressure. He was not accustomed to a single syllable stopping him in a corridor. "I don't know who you are," Rourke said, "but I suggest you step aside before this becomes something you regret." "Bryce Carver is in the lobby with Dwight Harmon," Noah said. "The waitress you had lined up is also with Dwight. Power panel in the lower corridor is fine, and the board in that room is about to see some documents that Serena pulled together from access logs, financial transfer records, and maintenance reports going back 4 months. He paused. "You should probably get a lawyer." Rourke stared at him. The door to the acquisition room opened. Serena stood in the doorway and she looked at Rourke with the expression of someone who had been carrying a very heavy thing for a long time and had just set it down. "Gavin," she said. Her voice was completely level. "Come in." The room Gavin Rourke walked into was not the room he had spent 6 months engineering. He had imagined this evening, many times had run through the versions of it the way a person runs through the versions of a thing they want badly enough to plan for carefully. In most of those versions, the room was in mild disarray. Serena absent, the board members restless and uncertain, primed for the alternative narrative he'd spent weeks preparing. The independent oversight panel watching the clock. The acquisition stalled at its most critical moment, the gap just wide enough for Mercer Vantage's counterbid to slide through. Instead, the board was seated. The oversight panel was present. The documents were laid out in their correct order. And every person in that room turned to look at Gavin Rourke entering behind Serena Blackwood, with the expression of someone who had not been expecting to enter this way from the corridor, without announcement, with Noah Callahan 2 steps behind him. Serena closed the door. She did not ask Rourke to sit. She walked to the head of the table and stood, and she said to the board, "I need to address something before we proceed. I apologize for the interruption to the evening's timeline. It won't take long." Thomas Weil, the board's senior member, a 70-year-old man who had been in corporate governance long enough to have seen most varieties of crisis, walked through a boardroom door, looked at Rourke standing near the wall, and then at Serena at the head of the table and said, with the particular calm of someone who had learned that calm was the most useful response to almost everything, "Take the time you need." Serena opened the folder on the table in front of her. Noah had given her the compiled file 3 days ago, 41 pages. Organized chronologically, with the maintenance logs first, then the access records, then the camera footage, timestamps, then the financial transfers laid against the acquisition timeline. She had read it twice and then handed it to her outside legal counsel, a woman named Frances Cho, who had been with Serena since before Blackwood Industries had its current name. Francis had spent 18 hours going through it and come back with a single-page summary and the words, "This is enough. Don't wait." Serena did not read from the file. She knew it well enough not to. Over the past 6 months, she said, a coordinated effort has been made to destabilize this acquisition by manufacturing incidents designed to impair my judgment and interrupt the deal's timeline. Those incidents included deliberate manipulation of security camera positions in this hotel, the calculated endangerment of my daughter, and the attempted use of falsified emergency communications tonight to remove me from this room at the moment of signing. She paused. One beat. The source of that effort is a person in this room. The temperature changed. That was the only way to describe it, not a sound, not a movement, just a quality in the air that shifted the way air shifts before something breaks. Rourke said, "Serena, whatever you think, I'm going to ask you not to speak right now, Gavin," she said, quietly, without particular anger. "The way you speak to someone when you no longer need to raise your voice to be heard. I'm going to ask you to stand there and listen, because what I'm about to share with this board is going to require a response from you eventually, and you should hear all of it before you decide what that response is." Rourke looked around the table. He was doing what people in his position do when the ground moves, looking for the face that might still be on his side, the ally who would provide a foothold. He found none. What he found were 11 faces in various states of attention, all of them waiting for Serena to continue. Continued. She laid it out in the order Noah had taught her to lay it out, not by conclusion first, but by evidence, because evidence that builds toward a conclusion is harder to dispute than a conclusion that then tries to justify itself. She went through the camera incidents, the maintenance records, the timeline correlation to the acquisition milestones, put the financial transfer documentation on the table, and passed copies to the board members. She named the shell company, named the beneficial ownership structure, named the subsidiary connection to Mercer Vantage Capital. She did not editorialize. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage, because she didn't need to. The documents performed it more effectively than emotion would have. The board members read what was in front of them. Thomas Weil turned 3 pages without looking up. A woman named Caroline Marsh, who handled technology strategy on the board, laid the documents flat on the table and looked at Rourke with an expression that contained no ambiguity. A younger board member named Hector Fuji, who had been on the board for 2 years, and still occasionally looked like he was surprised to be in the room, went through the financial transfers twice and then looked at Serena as if confirming that what he was reading was actually what he was reading. It was Gavin, Thomas Weil said finally. Just the name. He had a way of saying a single word that made the absence of everything else around it very loud. Rourke had been standing near the wall for 10 minutes. He had said nothing further after Serena's instruction. In that 10 minutes, his expression had moved through several phases, the beginning of a performance of indignation that he'd abandoned somewhere in the middle of the financial transfers section, then something that might have been calculation, then something that was harder to name and might have been the moment a person realizes that the version of events they'd constructed for themselves no longer has any purchase on reality. He said, "I want to speak with legal counsel." "That's your right," Serena said. "Your access to company systems has already been suspended tonight. That happened at 7:15. You're welcome to leave the building when you're ready. Dwight Harmon will ensure the process is orderly. You can't suspend my Section 9 of your executive contract," she said. "Suspension pending investigation. You signed it 14 years ago. I had Francis review it this afternoon." Rourke looked at her. It was a long look, and complicated the look of a person who has just understood that they have badly underestimated someone for a very long time. Not a new understanding for him, perhaps, but a final one. He left. The door closed behind him with the soft, well-engineered click of expensive hotel hardware. The room was quiet for a moment. Thomas Weil looked at Serena. "Are you all right?" he asked. Not as a formality, as a genuine question. "Yes," she said, and then because honesty seemed appropriate mostly. "This will go to the authorities?" "Tonight. Francis is already coordinating with outside counsel. We'll have a formal criminal referral filed by morning." She paused. "I also need to disclose that the investigation that produced this evidence was conducted with the assistance of an outside individual, not a company employee, not our security team. I want the board to have that context." Caroline Marsh looked at the door, then back at Serena. "The man who came in with Rourke?" "Yes." "Who is he?" Serena looked toward the door. Noah had positioned himself in the corridor. He'd stepped back out when the presentation began, which was exactly the right instinct. He wasn't performing. He wasn't waiting for acknowledgement. He was in the hallway doing what he'd been doing in various hallways for the past month, which was standing at the right distance from something important and making sure nothing reached it. His name is Noah Callahan, Serena said. He works for this hotel. The board registered this with varying degrees of visible reaction. Thomas Whale simply nodded, slowly, as if the information confirmed something he'd already decided to accept. Hector Fuji looked at the door with an expression somewhere between surprise and respect. "I'd like to take a 5-minute break," Serena said, "and then I'd like to complete the signing." The signing took 11 minutes. The documents had been prepared weeks in advance. The independent oversight panel verified each signature. Acquisition of Arcean Systems by Blackwood Industries was formalized at 8:57 in the evening in a third-floor conference room of the Cresthaven Grand Hotel, with a board that had just watched its CEO present a corporate conspiracy case and then sit down, straighten her jacket, uncap a pen, and sign her name with the steady hand of a person who had decided to finish what she started. Serena set the pen down. She looked at the signed documents for a moment. Then she looked up at Thomas Whale. "Thank you for your patience tonight," she said. "Thank you for your precision," he said. She stood, shook hands with the oversight representatives, accepted the subdued congratulations of the board, and got out of that room as quickly as she professionally could. Noah was at the far end of the corridor, leaning against the wall with his phone in his hand when Serena came through the door. He looked up. He read her face the same way he read everything, not for the surface expression, but for what was underneath it. What was underneath it was exhaustion and relief, and something that hadn't fully resolved yet. "It's done?" he asked. "Signed," she said. "Rourke is with Dwight. Carver is being held for the authorities. Kessler made a statement to Frances 20 minutes ago. She knew less than she thought she knew, which might help her and might not. That's not my decision to make." She stopped walking when she reached him. "Paula Green, the woman in my security scheduling office, who was feeding itinerary information to Rourke's assistant, she resigned by email at 8:30, which means she knew this was coming and chose the preemptive move." "That'll follow her," Noah said. "Yes, it will." Serena stood for a moment. She looked like someone who had been running on pure forward momentum for the past 4 days and was only now becoming aware of that fact. "I need to call my mother," she said. "I need to hear Ellie's voice." "Then go do that," he said. She looked at him. "Come downstairs with me first." He pushed off the wall and followed her down the corridor. They found a quiet spot in the East Wing lounge, the same lounge where Ellie had eaten her sandwich, and the same place where Piper and Ellie had sat on the carpet 3 weeks ago, with the backpack between them. The lounge was half lit at this hour, the gala sounds coming through, muffled from 2 floors up. Serena called her mother. She sat in one of the chairs and waited through 2 rings, and when her mother picked up, the strain in Serena's voice must have been audible because her mother said immediately, "She's right here. She fell asleep an hour ago. She's fine. Can you just hold the phone near her for a second?" Pause. Then the sound of a door opening quietly, and breathing the slow, unconscious breathing of a sleeping child. Serena closed her eyes. She sat there for about 10 seconds, just listening to her daughter breathe. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll explain everything tomorrow." She hung up and sat with the phone in her lap for a moment. Noah was in the chair across from her, not pushing anything, not filling the silence with words it didn't need. "She's asleep," Serena said. "I heard. She had the rabbit with her when she went down," my mother said. "Carries it everywhere now." She looked up. "You made that in about 45 seconds from a cleaning cloth." "Closer to 2 minutes," he said. "I was going for something better and ran out of ideas." That almost made her laugh, which was the first time in the past 4 hours that something had come close to that. Pressed it back. Not because she didn't want to laugh, because if she started, she wasn't entirely sure what would follow it, and she was still in the hotel, and still technically in a professional context, and there were limits to what she was willing to let happen in front of someone she respected. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay. Tonight the corridor, Carver. How did you know he was going to be there at that specific panel?" Noah was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know the specific panel. I knew what kind of disruption Rourke would need, and I thought about what the building's weak points were for that kind of thing. Secondary power routing is the cleanest option if you want to create chaos without leaving obvious physical evidence a power interruption reads as equipment failure. So I walked the lower level, looking for where that opportunity existed." And you found him. He found me in a sense. I heard him before I saw him. He was nervous, moving too carefully, the way people move when they're trying not to be heard, which is ironically louder than normal movement. You were trained to notice that. You notice it after a while, regardless of training, he said. People who are trying to hide give off a specific kind of attention, too aware of sound. Their breathing changes. She thought about that. What happened when you confronted him? Told him what I had. He calculated his options and concluded that running was a bad choice. How did you know he wouldn't run? He looked at the floor first, Noah said. People who are going to run look for the door. People who are going to stay look at the floor. He was calculating, not escaping. She studied him across the low table. You read people very quickly. I read situations quickly, he said. People are part of situations. Is that what you did with Ellie? That first Saturday? He thought about it. Not the quick, deflecting version of the answer, actually thinking about it. Yeah, mostly. The situation told me that everything everyone was doing was making it worse. So the right thing was the opposite of everything everyone was doing. Give her space. Give her one thing to focus on that wasn't threatening, and let her decide what happened next. He paused. That's not special. That's just basic. It didn't feel basic, Serena said. He didn't answer that. She leaned back in the chair. The fatigue was settling in properly now, not the sharp, pressurized alertness of the past 4 hours, but something heavier and more honest. 14 years, she said. He understood what she meant. Yeah. He was in the room when I made decisions that shaped this company. He sat across from me at executive retreats. He attended Ellie's second birthday party. She stopped. I don't know what's more disturbing, that he did this or that I didn't see it. You weren't supposed to see it, Noah said. That was the design. He spent a long time building a position where you trusted him, and then he used that position. That's not a failure of your judgment. That's someone running a very patient operation. Still feels like a failure. It would, he said. That doesn't make it one. She looked at him. He had a quality, and she had been trying to name it since the service corridor of saying things that were honest without being clean about it. Not therapeutic, not performed. Just accurate, the way a measurement is accurate. It didn't make the thing easier. It just made it real. Can I ask you something now? He said. Yes. The board's going to ask for a security restructuring. Dwight's good at his job, but something went wrong in how information moved through your organization. He'll cooperate fully. He's embarrassed. He should be, but he didn't know. You need better compartmentalization on executive itineraries. Security scheduling shouldn't be accessible to anyone who doesn't have a direct operational reason to see it. Francis and I talked about that tonight. We're bringing in an outside firm to audit the entire security information flow. She paused. That process, finding the gaps, understanding how information was moving, you did that in 3 weeks. From outside the organization, with access to fraction of what a security consultant would have. He was quiet. I'm not building to anything, she said. I just want to name it, because I think it should be named. You found something that my professional security operation missed for 4 months. You found it because you knew how to look at the right things in the right order. He looked uncomfortable with this, which she found interesting. He was comfortable with action and discomfort, with recognition she had already observed this pattern. The way he moved away from acknowledgement, the same way other people moved toward it. The access I had, he said. The inside view of the building. Noah. She said it the way he'd said her name in the conference room that first Saturday. Not demanding. Just direct. You don't have to minimize it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he gave a small nod that meant he'd heard her, even if he didn't entirely know what to do with the information. What happens now? He asked. Tonight I go home, I sleep, I wake up tomorrow, and start dealing with the organizational pieces. The legal process with Rourke will take months. The restructuring will take longer. She paused. And I have to figure out how to explain some version of this week to a 5-year-old who's been carrying a cloth rabbit around like it's the most important object she owns. Don't explain it, he said. She doesn't need the full version. She just needs to know she's safe, and you handled it. Is that what you'd do with Piper? With Piper, I'd say there was a problem, and it got fixed, and she can stop worrying about it. Then she'd ask me 7 follow-up questions, and I'd answer 5 of them. Which 2 would you skip? Whichever 2 she didn't actually need the answer to versus the ones she was asking out of genuine uncertainty. He paused. You learn the difference after a while. Serena smiled. Not the controlled, professional smile she deployed in meeting something quieter and less managed. You're a good father, she said. He seemed not to know what to do with that sentence for a moment. He looked at the table. Then I'm trying. That's what a good father says, she said. The lounge was quiet. From 2 floors up, the gala sounds had changed. The event was winding down. The formal portion clearly finished, the ambient noise of departure beginning to replace the ambient noise of arrival. The city outside the hotel's east windows was doing what cities did at 9:30 on a Saturday night, which was continue at full volume, indifferent to the things that had just been resolved inside one of its buildings. I should go find Dwight, Noah said. Make sure the handoff to the authorities goes clean. Before you do, Serena said. I want to say something clearly, while it's just us. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. Not the way I said it in the corridor that first Saturday. I was in shock, and it was the instinctive thing. This is different. She held his gaze. You gave my daughter something she needed when I couldn't reach her. And then you spent a month of your evenings tracking down a threat to my company and my family without asking for anything or announcing yourself or making it about what you'd done. I don't know how to adequately acknowledge that. You don't need to, he said. I know I don't need to. I'm choosing to. She paused. The world operates on a story that says people do things because of what they get for doing them. You keep breaking that story, and I keep not knowing what category to put you in. He was quiet for a moment. Then it's not that complicated. Tell me. Ellie was scared because someone put her there deliberately. He stopped, and something moved in his expression, something that came from further back than this conversation, further back than this hotel. That's not something you walk past. Serena thought about that. She thought about the 10 years he'd spent in places she'd never be, doing things she'd never fully know, coming home to a daughter who hadn't immediately known how to be in the same room with him. She thought about the promise he'd made himself, the one she'd only understood by listening carefully to what he didn't say about it. She thought about a man who sat down on a concrete floor and folded a cleaning rag into something ridiculous because a child needed one decision she could make herself. No, she said. It's not. Dwight Harmon had Rourke in the hotel's small security office, seated and waiting, when Noah came in at 9:45. 2 officers from the city's white-collar crimes division were already there. Francis Cho had moved efficiently on the criminal referral, and the preliminary conversation was in its early stages. Rourke looked up when Noah entered. That look again, the recalibration, the trying to place him in a context that made more sense than what the evening had provided. The janitor who wasn't quite a janitor, the man who had appeared in the corridor and said the deal was done before. Rourke had understood that it was done. He'll want to know how much of the financial transfer documentation holds up. Noah said quietly to Francis, who was standing near the door with a legal pad. All of it, she said. I had a forensic accountant on the phone for 2 hours this afternoon. The shell company's structure is paper thin. 3 degrees of separation at most between the beneficial ownership and Rourke's family connections. Has he asked about Carver? Not yet. He will. Carver's the weak point in his defense. If Carver corroborates the operational side, the financial transfers stop being coincidence and become payment for services. Noah glanced toward where Rourke was sitting. He knows that. Let me worry about that part, Francis said, and her tone communicated clearly that she had been worrying about exactly that part for the past several hours and had done so with considerably more legal training than Noah possessed. He took the point. He found Dwight in the corridor outside. Kessler, Noah said. What's her status? She made a voluntary statement. She says Rourke's assistant contacted her 3 weeks ago through a mutual connection, told her there'd be $500 in it for her to send a message at a specific time on a specific number. Claims she didn't know what the message was intended to do. Do you believe her? Dwight considered. I believe she didn't know the full picture. Whether she knew enough to be responsible, that's above my pay grade tonight. Fair enough. Noah leaned against the corridor wall. The evening's tension was beginning to find an exit, the slow decompression that came after the active part of something was finished and the administrative part remained. He was tired in the specific way of controlled sustained alertness, not sleepy, but hollowed out. Green resigned by email. Her access was suspended simultaneously with Rourke's at 7:15, so she had no system access remaining anyway. The resignation was more symbolic than functional. Dwight paused. She'll lawyer up by morning. Probably. The connections between her and Rourke going back 30 years, that's going to be part of the investigation? Yes. Serena and Francis are handling the referral. It'll include everything. Dwight nodded slowly. He looked at Noah with the particular regard he'd had since their conversation, Earlier in the evening, not warm, exactly, but something that had moved several degrees in a different direction from where it had started. You put this together in 3 weeks, he said, from the outside. From the inside, Noah said, I was in the building every Saturday. It's inside. You know what I mean? Noah shrugged. I had a clear view, and nobody was watching what I was doing because nobody thought there was anything to watch. That might be the most useful thing I've heard in a while, Dwight said, and it wasn't entirely clear whether he meant it as a professional observation or something more personal. Noah's phone buzzed. A text from Serena. Ellie's awake. My mother put her on the phone. She asked if you were okay. Stared at that for a moment. Then he typed back, tell her I'm fine. Tell her the rabbit did good work tonight. 3 dots appeared. Then she says the rabbit says you're welcome. He put the phone in his pocket. Something had shifted in his chest, not a large shift, not dramatic. Small, quiet kind. The kind you feel more than you notice. He stayed for another hour, making sure the handoff to the authorities was complete and the documentation was in Francis Cho's hands in the right order. He gave a brief statement to one of the detectives, who took notes without visible reaction, but asked 2 follow-up questions that indicated she understood the significance of what Noah had compiled. He confirmed the chain of custody on the financial transfer documentation important, because evidence that couldn't demonstrate a clean chain of custody had a way of becoming less useful when it mattered most. By 11:15, the formal portion was done. He walked out of the Cresthaven Grand Hotel through the service exit the same corridor, more or less, where he'd found Ellie crying on the floor 6 weeks ago. The same fluorescent lights, the same bare concrete, the hotel's bones, underneath all its polish. He stood in the employee parking area for a moment, in the cool night air, and let the evening settle. He thought about what Serena had said, that the world operated on a story where people did things for what they got in return, and that he kept breaking it. Turned that observation over and looked at it from a few different angles. He wasn't sure she was entirely wrong. He also wasn't sure the thing he'd done was as simple as she made it sound when she framed it as selfless, because it hadn't felt selfless, exactly. It had felt necessary, and things that feel necessary aren't always choices in the truest sense. He had walked into a service corridor and found a child who needed space, and he had given her space, and something had come out of that which led to everything else. He was not sure where the chain of necessities ended and something more deliberate began. He suspected those 2 things were harder to separate than they looked from the outside. He drove home through the Saturday night city. The streets did what they always did, the familiar sequence of lights from the hotel district to the commercial corridor to the narrower residential streets of Eastwick. Cracked sidewalk in front of the Delano house, the convenience store with its half-lit sign. He parked in the lot behind his building. He sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. He went inside quietly. Piper's door was still closed. He opened it an inch and listened the same slow, unconscious breathing as always. He pulled the door closed again. He stood in the kitchen in the dark and drank a glass of water. Kitchen table still had his laptop on it from the night before. The cereal box from breakfast was on the counter. Piper's ecosystem project worksheet was under a coffee mug she'd used as a paperweight. He looked at all of this for a while. Then he washed the glass, put it away, and went to bed. He thought he would lie awake again, the way he had been lying awake, with his mind running the data. But he was asleep within minutes, the hard, clean sleep of a person who has finished something that needed finishing and can put it down now. In the morning, Piper made him explain what a beneficial ownership structure was because she had found the legal pad he'd left on the table and read enough of it to have questions. He did his best. She listened with the focused seriousness she brought to everything. And then she said it sounded like the bad guy was bad at hiding. And he said that was a reasonably accurate summary, and she seemed satisfied with that. He made coffee. He opened the window over the sink. The neighborhood outside was doing what it did on Sunday mornings, which was take its time. His phone buzzed at 9:40. Serena. A text. She's asking if Piper can come over this afternoon. She's been asking since 7 a.m. He looked at this for a moment. Then he looked at Piper, who was rereading the legal pad with the systematic thoroughness of someone conducting a review. He typed, "What time?" The reply came back in under a minute, whenever works. "We're not going anywhere." He put the phone down on the counter and thought about the promise he'd made himself, and what it actually meant, and whether what he was looking at when he looked at Serena Blackwood and her daughter constituted a risk to that promise or something different entirely. Turn that question over carefully. the way he turned everything over. He did not arrive at a clean answer, because it was not that kind of question. He looked at Piper. "You want to go see Ellie this afternoon?" Piper looked up immediately. "Yes," she said. And then, because she was 8 and had her father's instincts about not appearing too eager, "I mean, if you're going, anyway." "I'm going anyway," he said. She went back to the legal pad, satisfied. He picked up the coffee mug. Outside the kitchen window, the city was doing what it always did, which was continue regardless, indifferent, and full of ordinary things. The kind of ordinary things that turn out, when you look at them from the right angle and in the right light, to be the only things that actually matter. The Sunday afternoon when Noah brought Piper to Serena's apartment was not dramatic in any way. That was the thing he noticed afterward, when he thought back on it, how ordinary it had been. Piper had brought her backpack because she brought it everywhere. And within 7 minutes of arriving, she and Ellie were on the living room floor conducting some kind of structured inspection of Ellie's stuffed animal collection, which apparently required both of them to hold each animal up and render a verdict before moving to the next one. Serena had made coffee. Noah had sat in a chair near the window that looked out over the city, and the two of them had talked while their daughters worked through what appeared to be a genuinely rigorous evaluation process on the other side of the room. It was the most normal afternoon Noah had spent in longer than he could immediately calculate. That unsettled him slightly, the way normal things sometimes do when you've been outside of them long enough that their return feels less like relief and more like a question. Serena had asked him, that first afternoon, what he needed from the near future, not what he wanted. She was too precise for that word, but what he needed. He had thought about this for a moment, which she allowed without filling the silence, and he had said nothing to change dramatically. He meant Piper's schedule. He meant the structure of their days. He meant the particular equilibrium they'd built, the two of them, in the rental in Eastwick with the half-lit convenience store on the corner, which was not much to look at, but had taken real effort to construct, and meant something because of that. She had nodded. Not disappointed processing. Thinking through how something fit rather than whether it could. 2 weeks after the gala, she called him. "I want to talk to you about something," she said. Not over the phone. He went to her office for the first time, the actual Blackwood Industries headquarters. Not a hotel conference room or a living room floor. It was the kind of office that reflected years of careful accumulation rather than a single large statement good furniture. Not showy furniture. A view of the city that was significant but not performatively so. He sat across from her desk, which was the first time he had sat across from her in a room that was unambiguously hers, and the power differential that had always technically existed between them was visible in a way it hadn't been in service corridors and hotel lounges. She seemed to register this. She came out from behind the desk and sat in the other chair across from him, which was a choice that said something specific. And she said, "I want to offer you a position." He had expected this. What kind of position? Head of Intelligence for Blackwood Industries Security Operations. Reporting directly to me. Salary that I'm going to stop you there, he said. She looked at him. "Not because I'm not interested," he said. "Because I need you to understand something before we talk about what this looks like, if it looks like anything. The last time I took a title, it came with a schedule that had no edges. I was gone more than I was home, and I told myself it was necessary, and then I came back to a daughter who had to relearn who I was." He paused. "I'm not doing that again. Not for any number." "I know," she said. "Do you?" "Yes." She said it simply. "That's why I'm not offering you that job. I'm offering you a different one." He waited. "Independent security consulting," she said. "Contract basis. You choose which projects you take. You set your hours around Piper's schedule. You are not on call. You are not deployable. You are not mine." She paused. "You'd be helping me build something smaller and more functional than what I currently have, not a large security department, but a better designed one. The kind of thing that doesn't let a Gavin Rourke run a 6-month operation without anyone noticing." Noah looked at her. "You want me to rebuild your security intelligence infrastructure. I want your eyes on how information moves through my organization, where the gaps are, how to close them without creating new ones." She held his gaze. "That's work you could do largely on your own schedule. Project-based, with real deliverables and real compensation and no uniform required. Turn that over. I'd still be at the hotel. Until you decided otherwise," she said. "That's your call, not mine. And this doesn't change." He stopped. She understood what he'd stopped on. It doesn't change what the afternoons look like, she said. Piper and Ellie on the floor arguing about stuffed animals. That's not contingent on this. I want to be clear about that. He looked at her for a moment. At the city behind her through the window. At the desk with its organized papers, and the coffee cup she'd carried in from somewhere that had a small chip in the rim, which he noticed because he noticed details, and because a chipped coffee cup in an office like this was a very specific kind of signal about a person. Okay, he said. Okay, you'll do it. Or okay, you heard me. Both, he said. The months that followed were not a clean arc. Nothing real ever is. The legal process surrounding Rourke moved the way legal processes move, with the grinding deliberateness of an institution that had no particular interest in anyone's timeline. There were depositions and document requests, and a period in which Frances Cho seemed to be living in her car between court appearances. Carver entered a plea agreement in exchange for testimony that provided the operational link between Rourke's payments and the incidents at the hotel, the camera adjustments, the door, the evening of the gala. Paula Green was charged separately and spent several months in a state of legal uncertainty before reaching her own agreement with prosecutors. Kessler, the waitress, was not charged. The evidence supported what she'd claimed, that she hadn't known the full picture of what she was participating in. Rourke maintained for several months that the financial transfers were legitimate consulting fees and the access log correlation was circumstantial. His attorney was competent, and his arguments were not entirely without logic. Combination of Carver's testimony and the forensic accounting which Frances's outside firm had pursued thoroughly, finding 2 additional payment tranches that Rourke had obscured in layers that looked secure until they weren't, made the circumstantial case considerably less comfortable to sit inside. He entered a plea in the 8th month. Serena was not in the courtroom for that. She was in a meeting about the RCN integration, which was proceeding with the particular friction of 2 organizations learning to occupy the same structure. She found out by text from Frances and sat with it for a moment before going back to the meeting. She did not feel the satisfaction she had expected to feel. She felt something more tired and more accurate, the recognition that the conclusion of a legal process and the conclusion of the damage it addressed were not the same event and did not happen on the same timeline. Rourke was handled. The trust that had been in the room with him for 14 years was not something a plea agreement restored. She had learned, over the months since the gala, to be more precise about what she could and couldn't fix. This was not entirely comfortable. She had spent a decade operating on the premise that most things yielded to sufficient effort and intelligence. Some things did. Some things simply changed you, and you carried the changed version forward and tried to make it useful. The security restructuring was the part she could fix, and she did it thoroughly. Noah spent 4 months inside the organization's information architecture, not as an employee, not with a badge or a title, but with access to the systems and the patience to understand how data moved through them. He delivered his findings in a report that Frances described as the clearest security intelligence document she had ever read, which, she said with the slight surprise of someone who had expected competence and received something more specific than that. The restructuring that followed was significant. Executive itinerary access was compartmentalized by operational need rather than seniority. Security scheduling was separated into its own silo with independent audit capability. Camera and access systems in properties connected to Blackwood Industries were reviewed against a new compliance standard that Noah had drafted, based partly on the gaps the hotel incidents had revealed. Dwight Harmon, who had initially received all of this with the bristled dignity of a professional being told his house was not in order, came around by the 3rd month, partly because Noah was not interested in making Dwight look bad, only in making the system work better, and Dwight was experienced enough to tell the difference. "You'd be good at this full-time," Dwight said one afternoon, in the matter-of-fact way of a man making an observation rather than an offer. "I know," Noah said, "that's not what I'm doing." Dwight looked at him. "The hotel thing. Piper's school is 3 blocks from the Cresthaven," Noah said. "The schedule works. You could find a schedule that worked from here." "I know," Noah said again. And that was the end of it. Because Noah had a way of ending conversations that were about things he'd already decided, which was to answer fully and then simply not continue. And Dwight had learned by this point that the not continuing was part of the answer. Noah kept the hotel shift until the following spring. Not because he had to. The consulting income had exceeded what he was making at Meridian Facilities by February, and Serena had raised the project rate twice without being asked. He kept it because it was Piper's schedule, and Piper's schedule was the architecture of their life, and he was not interested in changing the architecture before Piper was ready for it to change. He was also honest enough with himself to acknowledge that there was something in the continuity of it, the Saturday mornings. The cart, the East Wingtation, that he was not entirely ready to let go of, though he couldn't have said precisely what that something was. He left in April. His last day was a Saturday. The facilities manager, a quiet man named Ortega, who had never asked Noah any questions he didn't need answered, shook his hand and said he was sorry to lose a good worker. Noah thanked him and meant it. He walked the East Wing one final time. The corridor was exactly what it had always been, fluorescent lights, bare concrete, the bones of the building. He stood in the spot where he had sat down on the floor 6 months ago and folded a cleaning cloth into something ridiculous and waited. He stood there for maybe 30 seconds. Then he walked out. Ellie changed. Not immediately, not in a straight line, not the way changes happen in stories where a single event unlocks everything, and the difficult part is simply over. She continued in therapy. She continued to have days where the old fearfulness returned, and she held on with 2 fingers and checked over her shoulder before she sat beside a stranger. She had nights where she woke up and couldn't go back to sleep, and needed Serena in the room until the ceiling felt safe again. But she also began to laugh again in the unguarded way, the kind that arrived before she could organize it, the kind that made her whole face do something unpremeditated. She made a friend at school named Bia, who shared her intensity about small animals, and the 2 of them conducted what appeared to be an ongoing natural history survey of the school's outdoor areas during recess. She started a new notebook, not the small, careful one she'd been carrying, but a larger one with room for the kind of drawings that didn't know yet what they were becoming. She and Piper became what they were going to be, which was the kind of friendship that doesn't require explanation, because it operates on a frequency the 2 of them located instinctively and maintained without effort. Piper was 3 years older and treated Ellie with the combination of exasperated fondness and genuine investment that older children produce for younger ones they've decided to take seriously. Ellie treated Piper with an absolute confidence in her authority on all subjects that Piper found appropriately gratifying. They argued constantly. They also talked on the phone for 40 minutes about things that seemed to require 40 minutes of phone conversation. It was a real friendship, which meant it had friction and repair and the ongoing negotiation of 2 people who are actually different from each other but have decided that matters less than what they share. Cloth Rabbit lived on Ellie's bedside table. It was showing where by midsummer one ear more misshapen than it had started, the cloth itself softened from handling. Serena had quietly asked Noah if he could make another one, against the possibility that this one became irreparable. He'd made 2 in the kitchen at 11 at night, setting them on the table afterward and studying them with the same mild professional disappointment he'd shown in the service corridor. They were marginally better than the original, which somehow made them less right. Kept them in a box in her closet and hoped the original held together. It did. The thing between Noah and Serena built the way things build, when the people involved are both paying attention and both also somewhat wary of what they're paying attention to. They were not careless people. They had both been through the particular education of a marriage that ended, which tends to produce either recklessness in the rebound or a kind of hypervigilance that can look like caution and sometimes is and sometimes isn't. Noah was the hypervigilant kind. Serena was the kind who had learned to mistrust her own certainty in this area, which in her case was the appropriate lesson. She was very certain about most things, and certainty had not served her well in the specific context of Marcus. They met for coffee in October. Just coffee. Mid-morning, at a place near his new office space. He had taken a small shared workspace in a building 3 blocks from Piper's school. A single room with a desk and a window that looked at another building's wall, which suited him because he worked better without views that competed for attention. He had been working from there for 2 months on a security consulting project for a company unrelated to Blackwood, which Serena had encouraged because she was not interested in being his only client, and she understood intuitively what dependency did to relationships of any kind. They had coffee. They talked for 2 hours. They walked back toward his building in the October cold, which in that city had a particular quality, sharp and clean, with the smell of the season having turned for real rather than just getting ready to. At the corner, he said, "I want to say something." Stopped walking. He had learned that she stopped fully when she was listening. She didn't fidget or look away, or let her attention divide. She just stopped and looked at him. "I'm not good at the beginning of things," he said. "I'm better at the middle and the end. The beginning, I tend to move through too fast or too slow, and then look back and realize I handled it wrong." She waited. "So I want to say it plainly, instead of waiting until I think I've done the beginning correctly." He looked at her. At the familiar precision of her face, the jaw that was always a little set, the eyes that were always measuring something. At the chip in the coffee cup she was still holding from the shop they'd left 20 minutes ago. "I think we're already past the beginning. I think that happened a while ago, and I've been acting like we're still in it because it seemed safer." She was quiet for a moment. A cab went past on the street. Someone on the opposite corner was arguing cheerfully on the phone. The city continued at full volume. "October in a service corridor," she said. "September," he said. "It was September. It was late September. That's basically October." He almost smiled. "Okay. I've been doing the same thing," she said. "Acting like we're in the beginning because I wasn't sure you were ready for us not to be." She paused. "And because I wasn't entirely sure I was. Are you now?" She considered this with the honesty that was simply her nature, not performing consideration, actually doing it. "I'm not certain," she said. "But I think the uncertainty is different from not being ready. I think I'm uncertain the way you're uncertain about most things that actually matter, because they matter, not because they're wrong." He thought about this. He thought about what it meant that this woman, who was uncertain about very little in most areas of her life, was willing to say plainly that she was uncertain here. He thought about what it required of a person to say that out loud on a street corner in October. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They walked the last block to his building. He stopped at the door. She had a meeting at 2 and would take a car from here. They stood on the step for a moment, and it was not an awkward moment, which was itself something the absence of awkwardness, the particular ease of standing near someone and not needing the space to be anything other than what it was. "Come for dinner Sunday," he said. "Piper is making something she found in a cookbook. I've seen the ingredient list. It's ambitious." "What is it?" "She won't say. She says it's a surprise." "Ellie loves surprises," Serena said. "Then bring Ellie." She looked at him. "Okay," she said. She walked back down the steps. He went inside. That was it. That was the whole conversation. He stood in his small office and looked at the wall his window faced, and he thought, this is what the beginning of something feels like when you're not in a hurry. Different from the versions he'd known before. Quieter. More like something being built than something being ignited. Both kinds were real. This kind lasted longer. Sunday dinner was, as predicted, ambitious. Piper had found a recipe for a Moroccan-spiced chicken dish that she had described to Noah as not that hard based on an optimistic reading of the instructions. It was somewhat hard. It involved more steps than the recipe had implied, and a moment around 5:30 where the sauce had reduced too far, and Piper stood at the stove, looking at it with an expression of frank betrayal. "It says to stir it," she said. "You stirred it," Noah said. "I stirred it a lot." "Then that's not what went wrong." "What went wrong?" He looked at the sauce. "Too high. Turn it down and add a little water. It'll come back." She turned it down. She added water from the measuring cup. She stirred it, with the focused and somewhat grudging attention of someone who was not going to admit that this had been stressful. Came back. She studied it for a moment and then said okay in the tone of someone who had decided this had gone according to plan all along. Ellie and Serena arrived at 6. Ellie went immediately to find Piper and stood on a step stool beside her at the stove and offered opinions on the sauce that Piper accepted with selective graciousness. Serena stood in the kitchen doorway with a bottle of wine she'd brought, watching the two girls at the stove with an expression that Noah noticed from across the kitchen, because it was one of the less guarded ones she wasn't performing for anyone. She didn't know he was looking, and what was on her face was just the unmanaged version of what she felt when she looked at her daughter Happy. He looked at that for a moment. Then he went back to setting the table. Dinner was good genuinely, not out of politeness. The sauce had recovered, and the chicken was properly cooked, and Piper accepted the compliments with the careful nonchalance of someone who had worked very hard and was not going to let on how hard. Ellie ate more than Serena had expected her to eat in months, which Serena noticed and didn't comment on, because Ellie didn't need to be made self-conscious about it. Conversation at the table was the kind that happens when 4 people have stopped being careful around each other. It went in directions and doubled back and produced 2 separate arguments that resolved themselves without intervention. Piper and Ellie disagreed vigorously about whether sharks or octopuses were more interesting, which escalated to the point where both Noah and Serena were pulled in to provide supporting positions, and Noah found himself defending the octopus on what he recognized mid-argument were actually fairly strong scientific grounds. "They have 3 hearts," he said. "Sharks have been here for 400 million years," Piper said. "Octopuses are smarter." "Smarter than what? Than sharks?" "You can't know that." "You can actually," Noah said. "They've done tests." Piper looked at him with the expression she used when she suspected he was correct and was not ready to concede. Ellie, who had been on the octopus side from the beginning, looked at Piper with the patient confidence of someone waiting for the obvious conclusion to arrive. "Fine," Piper said. "Octopuses are smarter. Sharks are still cooler." "That's fair," Noah said. It was the kind of dinner that ended with the food gone and the dishes in the sink, and nobody moving quickly to do anything about them because everyone was still at the table, which was where they wanted to be. The girls had moved on from sharks and octopuses to a project Piper was doing about weather patterns, which Ellie found fascinating in the specific way she found most things fascinating completely. With no reservation, bringing her entire 5-year-old attention to bear on the subject until she understood enough of it to have questions that were too complicated to answer quickly. Serena and Noah did the dishes while the girls moved to the living room floor with Piper's notebook. It was a small kitchen. They worked around each other in the practical and slightly uncoordinated way of 2 people who had not yet calibrated their domestic proximity, a couple of near collisions at the sink, a moment where they both reached for the same towel, and then a negotiation about who needed it more urgently. It was not graceful. It was fine. It was the kind of fine that felt like something. "She ate," Serena said quietly, because she couldn't not say it. "I noticed," Noah said. "She hasn't eaten like that," and she stopped. "A while." Piper made her taste it twice during the cooking process, Noah said. "Quality control," she said. Serena laughed. "It was the unmanaged kind." "Of course she did." "Is that a problem?" "No," Serena said. "The opposite of a problem." She handed him a pot to dry. He dried it and put it away in the wrong cabinet, and she moved it without comment to the correct one, and he watched where she put it so he'd know for next time. For next time. He turned that thought over once and found it did not produce the alarm that similar thoughts had produced in other periods of his life. It just sat there, accurate and ordinary. Later, after the girls had run low on energy and Ellie had fallen asleep on Piper's bed during what was supposed to be a brief rest while the adults talked, Serena sat in the living room and Noah sat across from her, and the apartment was quiet in the way it got quiet when Piper was also in her room winding down, that specific quality of evening that belonged to parents everywhere. "I want to ask you something," Serena said. "Okay, what do you want?" Not the careful version, the actual one. He looked at her. He had known her long enough now to understand that she asked questions like this, not to unsettle people, but because she was genuinely unable to operate well on incomplete information. She needed to know things. It was who she was. "This," he said. The dinner and the argument about octopuses and the wrong cabinet and Ellie asleep in the next room. "This is what I want." She was quiet. "I spent a long time," he said, "in situations where the stakes were very high and the thing you were protecting was abstract. You knew the idea of what you were protecting, the concept of it. Couldn't sit at a table and eat chicken and argue about marine life with it." He paused. "I want the concrete version. The version I can see." Serena looked at him. The lamp beside the couch made everything in the room warm and slightly imprecise. The edges of things softened. She looked tired, which he'd noticed more lately. Not the performance of tiredness, but the real kind, the kind that settled in around the eyes and meant she'd been carrying something without putting it down. "Marcus called this week," she said. He waited. "About Ellie. Custody adjustment, he wants to add a Thursday overnight to his rotation." She looked at the window. "It's reasonable. She's doing better, and he should have more time with her. I know it's the right thing. But I've had her with me through the hardest part, and now that it's getting easier, he wants more schedule." She stopped. "That's not fair, and I know it's not fair. He's her father. This is how it's supposed to work." "It's still allowed to feel like something," Noah said. "I know." She looked back at him. "I don't need it to be fixed. I just needed to say it to someone who wasn't going to immediately tell me what the right answer was." "I'm not going to do that," he said. "I know you're not." She pulled her feet up under her on the couch, a small, informal adjustment that he hadn't seen her make before, the posture of someone who had stopped performing uprightness for the evening. "Why I said it." They sat for a while, not talking, not filling it. The silence between them had developed a quality that different silence has, the kind that means two people are in the same space and don't need it to be otherwise. Ellie woke up at 9:30, slightly disoriented, and appeared in the hallway doorway still holding the cloth rabbit she'd apparently been sleeping with in Piper's bed. She found her mother first, then registered Noah, and some private calculation resolved in her face. "I fell asleep," she said. "I know, baby," Serena said. "Did I miss anything?" "We talked about ordinary things," Serena said. Ellie considered this. She walked across the room and climbed onto the couch beside her mother with the comfortable lack of ceremony of a child who has decided this space is safe. And she looked at Noah across the room and said, "Mr. Noah, can you make another rabbit? What happened to the one you have?" She held it up. "This one's getting old. Rabbits are supposed to get old," Noah said. "That's how you know they've been used for the right things." Ellie looked at the rabbit. She seemed to find this satisfying in the specific way. She found honest answers satisfying completely without needing to add anything to it. "Okay," she said. She leaned against her mother's arm and closed her eyes again, not fully asleep but not awake in any active way, existing in the particular in-between that small children inhabit when they're comfortable enough not to need to be more alert. Serena put her arm around her. Noah looked at this across the room. Thought about the service corridor, the fluorescent lights, and the bare concrete, and the child pressing herself against the wall while a dozen well-meaning adults tried to reach her. He thought about sitting down on the floor with a cleaning cloth, and no particular plan beyond giving her something to look at that wasn't threatening. He thought about how far that moment had traveled to reach this one across months and hard work, and a conspiracy that had come apart at its seams, and a legal process still unwinding, and a friendship between two girls who had found each other's frequency on a corridor floor and hadn't let go. He thought about Piper asleep in the next room, about the cereal with the wrong milk, about the water cycle worksheet under the coffee mug, about all the Sunday mornings that had accumulated into a life he had chosen carefully and was going to protect the same way. He thought about what it meant to stay. Not stay in the dramatic sense, not the heroism of it, not the sacrifice version that made a good story from the outside. The ordinary version. The version that was just showing up on a Tuesday when nothing particular was happening. Being at the table. Drying the dishes into the wrong cabinet. Arguing about octopuses. Being someone that a child could fall asleep near without it requiring any explanation. He had spent years being extraordinary in places that consumed the ordinary. He understood now, in a way he hadn't when he was in the middle of it, that the consumption was the cost. You gave the ordinary away for the extraordinary, and the math felt right until it didn't. And by the time it stopped feeling right, you had accounts to settle that took longer than you expected. He was done with that accounting. He had settled it in Eastwick over 3 years of Saturday mornings and wrong milk, cereal, and weather cycle worksheets. He was not interested in reopening it. What he was interested in was sitting across the room from Serena Blackwood while her daughter slept against her arm in the quiet of an evening that was not dramatic or historic, and being where he was, without needing it to be something larger. "You're thinking about something," Serena said, without opening her eyes fully. "I think about things," he said. "I know. What is it tonight?" He considered the honest answer. "I was thinking about how most of the things that mattered most happened quietly," he said. "Not in the parts that seemed important. In the ordinary parts." She was quiet for a moment. Then the corridor. "That's not what I meant," he said. "I meant after. The dinners, the notebooks, the wrong cabinet." He paused. Ellie eating. Serena was quiet for a long moment. He watched something move through her face, something that wasn't going to become tears, but had to go somewhere, and took a moment to find where. "Yeah," she said finally. "Soft, me too." A year after a Saturday morning in September, when a janitor sat down on a concrete floor, Serena Blackwood stood outside Piper Callahan School in the late afternoon light of a day that was ordinary in every external respect. She stood beside Noah. They were not touching, because they were at a school pickup, and certain habits of care had not disappeared, but they were close in the way people are close when they have stopped negotiating that distance. The sky above the school was the particular blue of an afternoon that has decided to be generous, high, and clear, and the kind of color that makes the buildings under it look like themselves, but better. They heard them before they saw them. Two voices pitched high with the specific joy of children who have been inside all day and are now outside, and the outside is exactly as good as they remembered. Then Ellie came through the school doors first. She always came first because she was faster and younger and didn't understand yet why you would not simply run at things with her bare backpack bouncing and her new notebook clutched under one arm. And behind her Piper with the lightning bolt backpack and the expression she made when she was trying not to run but was running anyway. They ran toward Noah and Serena felt the specific quality of that moment, the running toward rather than the running from, which was a distinction that had meant something different to her in different seasons of the past year, and meant something specific now. Ellie reached Noah first. She hit him at speed, the way she always did, trusting completely that he would catch her, which he did, because he always did, and she threw her arms around his neck and he straightened up with her, hanging off him, like she weighed nothing, which she didn't, not to him. Serena watched this. She thought about the woman she had been in that service corridor, the one who had pressed the back of her hand against her mouth to keep from breaking open, watching her frightened daughter run toward a stranger on the floor. She thought about what she had understood in that moment, and what she had not yet understood, and how much distance lay between those two things. She had not understood that day why Ellie trusted him. She understood it now. Not because of the SEAL training, or the patience, or the operational intelligence, or any of the things that had revealed themselves in the months since. Because of the simpler thing underneath all of that. Because when Ellie had needed someone to stay, not arrive, not perform, not manage the situation, and leave, this man had stayed. He had sat on a floor and stayed. And something in Ellie, at 5 years old, with the directness that children have before they learn to second-guess their instincts, had recognized what staying felt like. The recognition had been right. Serena thought about all the things she'd spent her life, building the company, the deals, the rooms she'd worked her way into and eventually come to own. She did not regret any of it. She had built good things, and she intended to keep building them. But she had also spent years believing that the most important qualities a person could have were the ones that made them exceptional in those rooms: the speed of thought, the certainty, the ability to hold a position under pressure and not move. She still believed those things mattered. She had revised her understanding of their rank. The most important thing, she thought now, was not what you did in the exceptional moments. It was what you were in the ordinary ones. It was whether the people who needed you found you present when the situation wasn't dramatic, when nobody was watching, when there was no particular reason to show up except that you'd said you would. It was whether a child could fall asleep in your vicinity without it requiring explanation. Piper reached her, slightly out of breath, and Serena caught her in a hug that Piper tolerated for approximately 3 seconds before the information about her day became more urgent than the hug. Serena listened and looked across Piper's shoulder at Noah, with Ellie still hanging off his neck, and something passed between them that didn't need a name. "Can we get something?" Ellie was saying. "Can we get ice cream? Mr. Noah, can we get ice cream?" "It's 4 in the afternoon, Noah said. "Ice cream doesn't have a time," Ellie said, with the absolute authority of someone who had considered this carefully. "That's actually hard to argue with," Serena said. Noah looked at her over the top of Ellie's head. "Don't help her. She makes a good point. She always makes a good point. That's the problem." He set Ellie down. "Fine. Ice cream." Ellie took his hand with the automatic ease of a child who has stopped thinking about whether to do this and simply does it. Piper fell into step beside Serena, still talking about her day. The 4 of them walked down the street in the late afternoon light, an ordinary arrangement of people going to get ice cream on a Tuesday, which was not remarkable or historic or the kind of thing that anyone watching would have understood the full distance of. Nobody watching would have seen the service corridor or the cloth rabbit or the boardroom with 41 pages of evidence laid on a table. Nobody would have seen the late nights at the kitchen table, or the Thursday overnights Serena had learned to let go of, or the moment on an October street corner when 2 careful people had decided to stop treating the beginning like a waiting room. Nobody watching would have seen any of it. That was fine. Most of what mattered was invisible from the outside. Most of what held people together happened in the spaces between the visible moments, in the ordinary and unremarkable accumulation of showing up and staying and being present in the rooms that didn't make any particular history. Noah Callahan was not extraordinary because he had once done extraordinary things. He was extraordinary because when the people he loved needed him present, he showed up and he stayed, and he did not make them feel the cost of it. That was rarer than anything on his service record. Ellie skipped once on the sidewalk, still holding his hand, and the rabbit was in her jacket pocket where it lived now, worn soft from 6 months of being carried, its misshapen ear no worse than it had ever been. She had stopped explaining it to people who asked. She just had it, the way you have things that matter, without needing to justify the mattering. Serena walked beside Piper in the afternoon light and listened to her talk and felt the day around her, the ordinary, unremarkable, completely sufficient weight of it, and thought, this is the thing that lasts. Not the billion-dollar deal. Not the conspiracy exposed. Not the evidence laid on the table. Not the signing at 8:57. Those things mattered, and she had fought for them, and she did not diminish them. But this was the thing that lasted. The afternoon. The ice cream with no particular time for it. The small hand in a larger one. The sound of her daughter's voice beside her, talking about her day, trusting completely that someone was listening. She had been terrified once that she'd lost access to this. That the disruption, that careful, insufficient word, had broken something in Ellie that would stay broken. She had sat in a therapist's waiting room and in the dark on the couch at 3 in the morning and believed, with the particular clarity of 4A, certainty, that she did not know how to reach her own daughter. Then a man had sat on a floor, and everything had moved from there, in the direction that real things move, not in a straight line, not cleanly, not without cost, but forward, toward this afternoon, toward Ellie skipping on the sidewalk without fear, toward the shape of a life that was imperfect and real, and entirely, precisely enough. Noah looked back at her once, over his shoulder, and she met his eyes, and it was the same look they'd been exchanging for months in various rooms, the one that said nothing in particular, and said everything in general, the one that had started as a mutual acknowledgement that something was happening and had become, gradually and without announcement, the look of two people who had decided to stop being surprised by it. Smiled. He turned back to Ellie, who was explaining to him with great seriousness which flavor she intended to get, and why the choice was not as simple as it appeared. Serena kept walking. The afternoon held. The city went on around them at full volume, indifferent and full of its own ordinary urgencies, and the four of them moved through it the way people move through the world when they are, for this moment, exactly where they mean to be.